Hi guys. Tonight we step back through time into a world that feels both distant and oddly familiar. The air is cold, sharp as glass. You stand in the middle of a medieval village, and your breath drifts in pale clouds against the deep blue of early morning. The frost clings to the thatch of roofs like sugar on pastries, but there is no sweetness here. Only silence, smoke, and the faint sound of a cock crowing somewhere in the fog. You probably would not survive this, not even through one night without the tricks these villagers have learned through centuries of cold. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are at it, tell me where you are listening from and what time it is right now. I love seeing how far these sleepy stories travel. Now, dim the lights, and we will begin. You wake before the Sunday. The world is grey, suspended between night and day. The thatch above you whispers with frost, tiny crystals that creak as they melt from the warmth of the single fire you fought to keep alive all night. The coals glow faintly, dull orange beneath a layer of ash. If they die, you know you will have to beg for flame from a neighbour, walking barefoot across snow so cold it bites through your soles. In medieval winters, fire was life itself, as precious as bread or faith. Your breath hangs in the air as you sit up on a rough straw mattress stuffed with chaff and mouse droppings. It smells of damp and earth. The wool blanket that covers you is heavy, woven thick by hands that no longer feel the cold because the cold never leaves them. You listen for movement beyond the wall, maybe the shuffle of your neighbour's goat or the faint bleat of a sheep. The world feels small in winter, pressed tight by snowdrifts and silence. You crouch by the hearth. The stones are blackened, the fire barely alive. You poke at it with a stick, blowing gently until the ash stirs and an ember glows. That's enough to spark new life. The sound of crackling fills the space like a sigh of relief. You feed it a twist of dry straw, a few splinters of wood saved from yesterday's chopping, and then, slowly, a thicker log. The smell of burning oak begins to fill the room, mingled with smoke and the faint sweetness of old soot. A mainstream historical fact slips into your sleepy mind. Most peasants in northern Europe could burn only what they could gather. Wood was precious, often taxed, and sometimes forbidden for commoners to take from a lord's forest. They burned peat, dried dung, or bundles of twigs instead. It made thick, choking smoke, but it kept you from freezing. A quirky detail, one worth remembering, is that some households even mix straw with manure to make compact fuel cakes. Imagine that heating your home with yesterday's stable waste, carefully dried and stacked like treasure. You wrap your cloak tighter and glance through a slit window covered by a sheet of oiled linen. Glass is a luxury beyond your dreams. Outside, the snow glitters in blue light. The world is hushed, except for the crack of ice on the river and the far-off bark of a dog. You feel both trapped and protected, like a mouse in a burrow. Historians still argue whether winters in the medieval period were truly harsher than today's, or if our imagination amplifies them. But it is certain that for centuries, the Little Ice Age made frost deeper, crops slower, and nights impossibly long. You step outside. The cold bites instantly. Your breath makes ghosts in the air, curling upward toward a pale, frozen Sunday. The village is a cluster of thatched cottages, each huddled close like animals sharing warmth. Smoke rises from a few chimneys, thin and grey. The path between houses is packed snow, turned slick by countless boots. You hear the rhythmic chop of an axe, the sound of another villager gathering kindling before the day begins. Everyone moves slowly in winter. Even sound feels heavy. A rooster calls, though it has long since forgotten what dawn truly means in this grey season. Chickens puff their feathers against the cold, while a skinny dog noses through frost for scraps. You smell smoke, dung, and damp hay all mingled in one breath of air. It's unpleasant, but it means life is still here. Your stomach growls. Breakfast, if you are lucky, will be a crust of rye bread dipped in weak ale or broth. The bread is dark, hard enough to break a tooth, baked from flour mixed with husks to stretch it through the winter. You chew slowly, letting it soften on your tongue, and the warmth of the fire becomes your only comfort. You think of how fragile this balance is. A single bad harvest, an illness, a broken roof beam under snow, and the margin between survival and death disappears. Yet people endured. They learned to read the rhythm of the seasons, to prepare through autumn with salted meat, dried peas, and stored apples. Everything you have now is what you earned before the frost came. The village elder passes by, wrapped in a faded cloak lined with fur. His beard is rimed with ice, his steps deliberate. He nods in greeting. You return the gesture. Beneath the surface of daily hardship, there is a quiet strength here, a trust in old ways that keep everyone alive. You glance at the church on the hill, its bell tower poking through the mist like a warning finger. On Sundays, the villagers will trudge there in their best rags, kneeling on frozen floors to thank God for simply surviving. A snowflake lands on your glove, intricate and perfect. You watch it melt slowly, turning from crystal to a drop of water that seeps into the wool. You cannot help but marvel at how the villagers find beauty even in hardship. The children chase one another through the drifts, laughing, their cheeks raw and red. Someone calls them back to the hearth, and you hear the low hum of voices, a comfort more warming than fire. As you stand there, the wind rises again, lifting the snow into little spirals. The sun, pale and weak, climbs reluctantly over the frozen fields. You realize the day will be long, but it will pass. Like every day before, the villagers have no choice but to endure, and somehow, they do. Later, when night returns and the stars glint cold above the roofs, you will huddle again beside the fire, its glow soft on the stone walls. The air will smell of smoke and tallow, of wool and life. You will close your eyes and listen to the creak of the timbers, the sigh of the wind beyond the door, and feel the ancient rhythm of human survival pulse through you. This is how the story begins, with frost in your hair, ash on your fingers, and a fragile fire that refuses to die. You sit closer to the fire now, feeling the faint heat kiss your hands. It is not enough to chase the chill from your bones, but it helps. In a medieval winter, every flicker of flame mattered. The hearth was not only a place for warmth, it was the heart of the home, the soul around which life turned. If the fire went out, the day began in panic. You imagine scraping flint, blowing until your lips crack, coaxing the tiniest spark into life with straw and prayer. You would guard that glow like your own heartbeat. The hearth is more than survival. It is where meals are cooked, where stories are told, where hands are warmed after hours of toil. You can almost hear the hiss of water in a blackened pot, smell the sweet tang of onions and leeks simmering slowly, the faint smoke that curls up through the rafters and leaves a soot halo on every beam. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind. In most medieval homes, the hearth was built in the center of the single-room dwelling without a chimney. The smoke escaped through a small hole in the roof or a gap near the gable. It filled the air, stinging the eyes and coating the walls, but it also helped preserve the thatch by deterring insects and waterproofing it with layers of soot. Ingenious, if a bit choking. You lean back, imagining the ceiling blackened with decades of smoke. The smell is always there, clinging to your hair and clothes. People probably stopped noticing it after a while. What they noticed instead was the silence when the fire dimmed, the sense of loss when the crackle faded. It meant the warmth was slipping away. That night would be cruel again. A quirky bit of lore reaches your thoughts. In some villages, people believed the fire had a spirit of its own, often called the hearth mother or the fire wife. It had to be treated kindly. You could not spit in the fire or throw refuse on it, or you might anger her. Some would even whisper greetings to the flames each morning, as if to thank a friend for staying through the night. You picture yourself tending that same fire. The wood hisses, resin bubbling as it burns. The glow paints the rough walls with gold. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters, and snow thuds softly against the door. The world feels impossibly far away, and yet this small circle of light feels like all that matters. Historians still argue whether domestic fires were truly constant or if villagers let them die and relit them daily. But either way, the act of keeping flame alive shaped every habit, every fear. You reach for a log from the small stack beside the hearth. It is precious. Every piece represents a back-breaking hour in the forest, cutting, dragging, and splitting. Most peasants did not own woodland. They gathered fallen branches from the edges of the Lord's land, always cautious not to take too much. To be caught stealing wood could mean a fine, or worse. In parts of England, men lost hands for it. Firewood was worth nearly as much as bread. When the stack ran low, they burned whatever they could find. Peat from the bog, straw twisted into cords, even dried dung. The smell could be unbearable, thick and bitter, but it kept families alive. The warmth from a good peat fire was slow and steady, a deep heat that stayed in the stones long after the flame died. You can almost feel it on your skin as you listen to the wind outside. Sometimes, villagers built their hearths with stones scavenged from old Roman ruins, not knowing their history, but trusting their strength. You imagine a peasant woman kneeling beside such a hearth, lighting her kindling against stones carved centuries before, the past and present mingling in the firelight. That quiet continuity is oddly comforting. You shift and glance around the small room. The walls are wattle and daub, patched with mud. The floor is packed earth, swept daily but still dusty. Against one wall sits a wooden bench, against another a small table. The light flickers on everything, making even simple things, an iron pot, a ladle, a clay cup seem alive. The fire gives shape to life itself. Without it, the darkness would swallow everything. You think of how people gathered around this same glow in the evenings. Neighbors would visit, trading gossip, mending nets, or just sitting quietly. The fire was the television of its time, hypnotic, storytelling in its rhythm. Someone might hum a song while spinning wool. Another might tell a tale about saints or beasts that haunted the nearby woods. Children would drift to sleep, their faces turned toward the embers, while the adults whispered of next year's harvest and the price of grain. The air in the cottage grows warmer, though still heavy with smoke. You can hear the soft breathing of others stirring awake. Someone coughs, deep and wet. Winter always brings sickness. The smoke irritates throats already raw from the cold. You stir the fire again, sending a rush of sparks upward. For a moment, the walls gleam with life. You wonder what it must have felt like to wake each morning, knowing your survival depends on something as fragile as a few burning sticks. The discipline of it, the mindfulness, must have shaped entire generations. No wonder people learned to respect flame, to fear it, to build rituals around it. In some households, the youngest child's first chore was to guard the fire, to learn how to feed it just enough to last the night. That same child would someday pass the skill down again. Firekeeping was a sacred craft. You rest your head against the wall and watch the embers pulse, steady and slow like breathing. Outside, you hear a rooster again, defiant in the cold. Somewhere beyond, a dog barks, then falls silent. The village is waking. Someone will come soon with a jug of ale, someone else with news about a neighbor's cow or a broken plough. Life will resume, because the fire has lived another day. You smile, half asleep, half dreaming. The warmth creeps up your arms, into your chest. It is a fragile comfort, but a real one. Every medieval home, from the poorest hut to the Lord's hall, shared this same truth. The fire binds you to the earth, to each other, to time itself. As the flames settle and your eyes grow heavy, you realize how strange it is that something so simple could define an entire civilization. Yet it did, and in this quiet, smoky room you can feel the echo of every life that ever sat beside a fire and whispered, "We made it through another night." The morning light barely touches the fields, but already you are layering clothes. In the medieval chill, dressing is not fashion but survival. You begin with a rough linen shirt, course against your skin, and pull on woolen hose that itch like dry grass. Every layer traps a little more warmth, a small victory against the cold air that creeps in through every crack and seam. You reach for your tunic, heavy and scratchy, the kind dyed in dull browns and greys from onion skins or madder root. It smells faintly of smoke and sheep, the scent of winter itself. You tighten your belt and tug your cloak around your shoulders. The wool feels damp at the edges, forever half wet from melting frost. You understand now why warmth was measured not in degrees, but in layers. Each thread between you and the cold is a shield. Gloves are a luxury you might not have. Instead, you tuck your hands under your arms, or inside your sleeves, the way everyone does. The chill still seeps in, but you grow used to it, the way people always do when they have no choice. Records from the period reveal that wool was the backbone of medieval clothing, not only for comfort, but as the cornerstone of the European economy. Entire villages survived by raising sheep, spinning yarn, and weaving fabric that travelled across continents. England's wealth in later centuries would be built on this same trade. Yet here, in your small frozen village, that grand commerce is reduced to a single fraying cloak. Curiously enough, some households lined their clothing with fur not only for warmth, but for symbolism. Rabbit fur meant thrift, fox suggested cunning, and squirrel the prized vair decorated the gowns of the rich. Peasants took whatever they could trap or barter. In a lucky winter, you might have a bit of sheepskin around your neck, its lanolin-scented wool still clinging to warmth from the animal it once was. You lift the hood and fasten it under your chin. The cloth muffles your breath and the sound of the wind. Outside, snow falls again, soft as ash. The flakes cling to your cloak and melt slowly, turning it darker. Around you, the villagers move like shadows through the grey. They are bundled in the same muted colours, faces half hidden beneath wool and linen. Only the children's red cheeks and chapped noses break the monotony. Archaeological finds suggest that even the simplest garments were layered cleverly. Undergarments of linen absorbed sweat and could be washed, while outer woolen layers trapped heat and shed water. The wealthy wore fine-spun fabrics that could almost pass for silk, but the average person? You would have patched and repatched until the cloth became more mending than material. Old sleeves turned into mittens, worn cloaks became bedding. Nothing was wasted. You watch as a woman next door beats a cloak against the fence, shaking out the snow. Her skirt is heavy and stiff, her breath visible as she works. Children tug at her sleeves, their tunics far too thin. You feel the wind cut through you and imagine what it would be like to sleep in these clothes, to never fully take them off because the air inside your cottage is barely warmer than the world outside. Evidence suggests that poor villagers even stuffed straw or dried moss inside their shoes for insulation. It sounds desperate, but it worked. In Scandinavia, fishermen filled their boots with dried grass to survive long hours at sea. The grass absorbed sweat, preventing frostbite, a trick that endured for centuries. Little innovations like that kept whole families alive. You adjust your belt again, feeling how it presses against your layers. Every garment has weight. You carry it like armor. The wool scratches your skin, but there's comfort in its coarseness. It reminds you that you are still here, still breathing. The smell of lanolin, the faint itch, the constant rustle, these are the sounds and scents of staying alive. Modern scholars still debate how common fur and lined garments really were among peasants. Some argue that most could not afford even scraps, while others point to wills and inventories showing that furs were traded widely, if modestly. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between. You can picture a village where one fox pelt is passed from family to family, carefully sewn into collars, cuffs, or linings. It might last decades before falling apart entirely. The snow deepens around your boots as you step toward the byre. The cold stings your face until your nose goes numb. A rooster squawks from beneath a slanted roof, shaking loose a sprinkle of snow. You pull your hood tighter. The sky is the color of pewter, and the breath of the village rises like mist. Everything is still, except for the slow, patient movements of people who have learned to work inside the cold rather than against it. You pass a man repairing a harness beside a wall. His fingers are raw and cracked, wrapped in strips of cloth. He glances up, nods, and continues working. His cloak, patched in 5 different colors, looks like a tapestry of endurance. You realize how the rhythm of life depends not on comfort, but on persistence. Warmth is not a gift. It is earned through labor and stubbornness. Inside your mind, you replay what warmth means in this world. It is the thick smell of damp wool drying by the fire. It is the sound of a cloak brushing straw as someone passes by. It is the faint heat of a shared bed, where 5 bodies huddle close under one blanket. No one here thinks of warmth as luxury, it is duty, a shared struggle. A faint sound catches your ear, a song hummed softly by a young girl spinning yarn by the doorway. Her spindle twirls between her fingers, the wool gliding smooth as breath. Her melody drifts through the air, delicate and tired, as if she's singing to the winter itself. You watch her for a while and feel something loosen inside you. Perhaps that is the secret to survival here. Not strength, but rhythm, the steady motions of hands and heart. The cold does not relent, but you adjust again, and somehow it feels bearable. You look down at your patched clothes, your stiff boots, and think of how many lives are woven into their threads. The sheep, the spinner, the dyer, the weaver, the mother who mended them by firelight. Every layer holds a story. And tonight, when you lie down again, it will be those layers that cradle you against the winter dark. The morning deepens into a grey, dim light as you step back inside your cottage. The warmth from the hearth barely reaches the far corners of the room. Your stomach aches quietly, reminding you that food is the true currency of survival. The smell of yesterday's broth lingers faintly in the air, mingled with the earthy scent of smoke and damp straw. It is time to eat again, though you already know the meal will be thin and plain. You take a piece of coarse bread from the shelf, dark with barley and rye. It feels heavy in your hand, baked hard to last through weeks of cold. When you bite it, the crust scrapes your gums, and the inside tastes faintly sour. It fills the emptiness, though barely. You dip it into a small bowl of ale, letting it soften. The liquid is warm, flat, and slightly sweet. For many villagers, ale is not indulgence but hydration. The brewing process kills the water's bacteria, making it safer than the well. Contemporary records show that medieval diets shifted dramatically in winter. With no fresh produce, people relied on preserved goods stored during autumn. Salted pork, smoked fish, pickled cabbage, and dried peas formed the backbone of the cold season's meals. You can almost imagine the tang of brine, the chew of meat cured so long it turns nearly leathery. Each bite carried the taste of survival. Sometimes, families roasted a rabbit or pigeon caught in the woods, though that risked fines from the Lord's forester. Hunting rights were tightly controlled, and poaching was punished harshly. Still, the hunger of January has a way of silencing fear. You picture a man slipping into the forest at dusk, a simple snare hidden beneath the snow, his breath tight with hope. If he returns with meat, the family eats. If not, they make do with broth thickened by barley and old bones. Curiously, people found comfort in fermentation. Ale, cider, and mead warmed both body and spirit. Even children drank weak ale throughout the day. For flavor and nutrition, villagers sometimes steeped herbs such as nettle, dandelion, or sage. The bitter scent of these brews would fill the air, cutting through the cold like medicine. You wonder how they tolerated such monotony, eating the same handful of ingredients for months. But hunger teaches the palate to be humble. One curious document from a monastery lists winter fasting allowances, where monks could consume fish, dairy, and even ale during fasting days because these were not considered meat. Ordinary villagers often mirrored such customs, partly from devotion, partly because abstinence was cheaper. It is hard not to smile at the irony, hunger dressed as holiness. Still, These rituals gave meaning to deprivation, turning survival into a sacred rhythm. Researchers continue to debate whether most peasants truly face starvation every winter or if they adapted better than romantic images suggest. Skeletal studies show signs of malnutrition, but also resilience. People grew shorter, thinner, but they endured. The rhythm of scarcity shaped their minds as much as their bodies. Each season carried its own taste. Spring's greens, summer's abundance, autumn's smoke, and winter's salt. You sit now by the hearth again, watching the stew pot bubble slowly. Inside it floats a handful of beans, a lump of salted meat, and a few shriveled carrots. The smell is humble but comforting. A spoonful fills your mouth with warmth that spreads through your chest. For a moment, the world feels safe. Someone outside calls for help lifting a barrel. You push yourself up, still chewing, and step into the cold again. The air hits your tongue like iron. In the yard, a neighbor rolls a cask of salted herring toward her door. The smell is sharp, and her hands are red from the brine. You lend your shoulder to help her. Together you heave it across the snow, both of you laughing softly at how absurdly heavy it feels. There is camaraderie in this labor, a warmth beyond fire. In some regions, salt itself was worth more than silver. Merchants crossed frozen roads to deliver it, their wagons creaking under the weight. Without it, no family could survive the long season. You glance at your neighbor's small storehouse, where barrels of preserved food line the wall like soldiers. The faint hiss of wind through the cracks sounds like breathing. You realize each one of these barrels is a heartbeat for the village. You return to your cottage, brushing snow from your shoulders. The smell of stew has deepened. You add a pinch of dried herbs saved from summer, thyme perhaps or sage. The scent rises, filling the air with a promise of something gentler. You close your eyes and breathe it in. It feels like memory, like hope disguised as steam. An old story says that villagers believed bread could sense fear. If you broke it with trembling hands, it would crumble, and you would go hungry. So you tear it slowly, gently, letting the crumbs fall where they may. It is a superstition, of course, but one that carries a truth. Patience and calm are as nourishing as food itself. You wonder how many fears people buried beneath the daily act of eating. You eat again, dipping bread into the stew. The taste is rich now, smoky and deep. The meat falls apart easily. It is the first real comfort you have felt all day. You lean back and listen to the soft sounds of the village, the lowing of cattle, the distant chatter of children, the thump of wood being chopped. Life continues, one spoonful, one breath, one heartbeat at a time. Outside, the light is fading already, though it feels as if morning barely began. The sun in winter is brief and uncertain. You draw your cloak tighter, savoring the last of the warmth before it slips away. Tomorrow will bring the same hunger, the same slow rhythm, and you will answer it the same way. Eat, endure, and wait for spring. That, you realize, is the truest meal of all. The snow stretches like a white blanket over the land, muffling sound and slowing time itself. You stand at the edge of the field, staring at the rows now hidden under a crust of frost. The soil you once turned with bare hands has become iron, frozen solid. No plough can cut through it, no seed would dare sprout. The village sleeps with the earth, both bound by the season's stillness. The cold stings your cheeks as you walk along the boundary marked by wooden posts and stone heaps. Somewhere beneath the snow lie the stubble of last year's harvest, reminders of warmer days. In the distance, the black shapes of trees break the horizon, their branches heavy with ice. The only movement comes from crows circling overhead, their calls sharp and hollow. Documents from the late Middle Ages describe how winters forced farmers into a different rhythm. When the fields froze, the work did not end, it merely shifted. People mended tools, sharpened blades, and checked their stores. Every task became preparation for the coming spring. The slower pace gave time for thought, for gossip, for small joys that only flickered to life when the fields were still. You kick at the snow, uncovering a clump of straw left behind during threshing. It crumbles easily, pale and dry. Some of it will be used for bedding, some for kindling, and some mixed into mud to patch walls. Nothing in the village goes to waste. You remember that every bit of grain has already been counted, every sack recorded, because one mistake in autumn means hunger by February. Curiously, some records mention that villagers sometimes threshed grain indoors, beating it with flails inside barns to keep warm and make work possible through the dark months. The rhythm of those blows echoed like a drum, steady and hypnotic. You can almost hear it, the dull thud of wood on straw, the faint rustle as the husks break away, and the dry whisper of grain falling into baskets. It was hard work, but the sound was comforting, proof that life still moved beneath the frost. You look toward the small barn beyond the cottages. Its roof sags under snow, and the wooden doors are tied with rope. Inside, the air will be thick with the smell of hay and animals. You push the door open and step into the dimness. The warmth hits you first, then the sound, soft breathing, the occasional snort of a horse, the quiet shifting of cows in their stalls. Their heat and breath keep the air above freezing. Within these walls, survival hums quietly. People often worked here during the coldest weeks, repairing harnesses, weaving rope, or carving new handles for tools. A farmer might shape a new rake or mend a broken hoe while his animals watched, their breath turning to mist. He would murmur to them, sometimes even sing, not out of sentiment, but habit. In this dim, smoky half-light, the line between man and beast blurred. Both waited for spring to return. Archaeological evidence suggests that barns doubled as workspaces, social spaces, even sleeping quarters for some during brutal cold spells. The smell of manure mixed with the scent of wood shavings and sweat, creating a heavy warmth that clung to every surface. You close your eyes and feel it, the low hum of life pressed together in tight quarters, the kind of warmth born not from comfort but from necessity. A curious belief from certain regions held that fields had to rest like people. If the soil were not allowed to sleep, it would grow angry and yield poorly. So farmers would bless their land each winter, walking its frozen boundaries with a torch or sprinkling ash to appease the earth's spirit. Whether superstition or instinct, it reflected a deep respect for the rhythm of nature, a reminder that the land, too, has limits. Experts still discuss how villagers divided their winters between labor and stillness. Some accounts describe tireless maintenance of tools and barns, while others depict a slower existence marked by stories, song, and prayer. The truth, as always, is probably in between. Work continued, but it moved at the pace of the fire, the slow and steady rhythm of survival. Outside, the wind picks up, sweeping snow across the open fields. You pull your hood close and step back into the cold. The sound of the barn door creaking shut behind you fades quickly, swallowed by the vast quiet. You glance back once, watching the faint plume of smoke from your chimney merge with the grey sky. You know that the earth beneath you still breathes, even if faintly. Roots sleep deep below, waiting for warmth. The seeds stored in clay jars by your hearth carry the promise of green days ahead. You think of those seeds often, almost like loved ones you hope to see again. Each one is a small miracle trapped in time, waiting to wake. You turn toward the village again, snow crunching beneath your boots. Somewhere, someone is singing faintly, maybe spinning yarn or rocking a child. The sound mingles with the sigh of the wind. For a moment, it feels like the whole world is holding its breath. The fields are sleeping, the people are mending, and you are learning to live within the rhythm of stillness. This is winter's lesson. You cannot fight it. You can only wait with quiet faith. When spring comes, you will return to these same fields with aching arms and hopeful eyes. But for now, the frost has the final word, and you must listen. The air inside the cottage feels dense with smoke and breath as the daylight fades. Outside, the frost thickens again, forming tiny crystals on the window's oiled linen. You sit cross-legged near the fire, your fingers stiff from the cold. The day's field work is done, but the night's work is just beginning. In winter, the fields rest, but the people never truly stop. The cottage becomes a workshop after dark. You reach for a small basket filled with odds and ends thread, scraps of fabric, half-burned candles, a few bent nails saved from old shoes. Every object here has been used before, repaired, and will be used again. You take a deep breath, the air thick with the scent of tallow, wool, and warm wood. This is the rhythm of winter evenings. Slow, steady, and endlessly practical. Contemporary household accounts tell us that this season was the time for crafts and handiwork. Women spun flax or wool into thread, their hands moving automatically while men wove baskets, repaired tools, or carved handles for sickles and knives. The flicker of the hearth made shadows dance on the walls, while voices hummed low songs to fill the silence. The cold might rage outside, but inside, the small circle of light became a world of its own. You watch as the spindle spins between your fingers. The wool slips like soft smoke through your hands, twisting into thread that will someday become cloth. Each movement is meditative. The hiss of the fire, the creak of the wooden stool, the faint tapping of a hammer in the neighbor's cottage, they blend into a single, comforting rhythm. Curiously, certain medieval households hung charms above their looms to keep mischief away. Spinning was sacred work, a balance of patience and luck. In some regions, people believed that spinning after sunset could summon spirits who tangled the thread out of jealousy. So, before you begin, you whisper a small blessing not out of fear, but habit. In the dark months, belief is just another tool for survival. You glance toward the window again. The world outside has vanished into white. You can hear the faint howl of the wind, a lonely sound that makes the fire's crackle seem almost musical. The candle beside you gutters in its iron holder, dripping wax that hardens instantly on the table. You catch it, peel it off, and press it back into the base. Every scrap of wax is saved. Light itself is a form of currency. Evidence from monastic records suggests that in deep winter, candle making was a vital task. Tallow from slaughtered animals was rendered slowly, its greasy smell thick and unpleasant, but the candles it produced meant safety. A single candle could light a family's evening meal or guide someone through the dark to a neighbor's door. Beeswax, sweeter and cleaner, was reserved for churches or the wealthy. You can almost smell the difference, the animal tang of tallow against the honeyed fragrance of wax. You look down at your rough hands, the knuckles cracked from cold. The thread breaks again, and you tie it with a sigh. Around you, others work quietly. One mends a torn cloak, another shapes wooden pegs by the firelight. Someone hums an old carol, one of those half-sacred, half-earthly songs about warmth and home. The tune drifts lazily through the room, carrying a peace that feels older than memory. An odd entry from a parish ledger mentions that villagers paid part of their taxes in finished goods during winter-woven cloth, ropes, candles, or tools. Money was scarce, but labor was abundant. In that way, even the poorest contributed, their winter work woven into the fabric of the village's survival. You imagine this same trade happening all around you, quiet and unseen, each household producing a thread in a vast, invisible tapestry. Outside, the wind dies for a moment, and you can hear the distant chime of the church bell. It counts the hours slowly, echoing through the frost. You pause, listening, and realize how time feels different in winter. It stretches, folds, repeats, days blur into nights, tasks into rituals. You cannot hurry. The world itself moves too slowly for that. Modern historians sometimes suggest that these slower months may have been the most peaceful time in the medieval year. There was less danger of raids, less exhaustion from endless planting or harvesting. Families gathered close, stories grew longer, and even work took on a softer rhythm. Yet others argue that winter was when despair crept closest, when hunger and illness thinned households before spring could return. Perhaps both are true. The stillness of the season hides both comfort and fear. You look again at the thread you have spun. It coils neatly around the spindle, light as a whisper. You smile to yourself. It is not much, but it is something you have made with your hands, a tangible defiance against the season's cold indifference. You stretch your fingers, warm them by the hearth, and take another handful of wool. Somewhere nearby, a child yawns. A mother stirs a pot on the hearth, its scent thick and savory. A cat curls close to the fire, its fur rising and falling with the rhythm of sleep. Outside, snow continues to fall in slow, silent flakes. Inside, you spin, mend, and work until your eyelids grow heavy. The fire has burned low, but it is enough. In a world where every resource is scarce, these quiet tasks are not just chores, they are acts of endurance, of quiet artistry. Each stitch, each candle, each thread spun through cold fingers is a small promise to see another spring. The night deepens, and you close your eyes, the sound of the spindle still turning softly in your dreams. The night fades slowly, and when you wake again, your breath hangs white in the air. The fire has burned to ash, the coals dark and cold. Your fingers ache as you rise from the straw bed. The cottage feels as if the cold itself has crept inside to sit beside you. You pull your cloak tighter, listening to the faint groan of the wind pressing against the walls. You move toward the door and push it open carefully. A blast of air greets you, sharp and metallic. Outside, the roofs glisten with frost, each thatched ridge sparkling faintly beneath the pale dawn. You step into the snow, boots sinking softly. The air smells clean, almost sweet, and distant smoke trails from the neighbors' chimneys. You take in the shape of your cottage from the outside, seeing it as if for the first time. Its low, uneven walls lean slightly inward, like a tired old man bracing himself against the cold. Medieval homes were built for warmth above all else. Records and surviving examples show that most peasant cottages had only one main room, sometimes with a loft above it for sleeping. The walls were made of wattle and daub, a lattice of woven sticks covered with mud, straw, and dung. It sounds crude, but the mixture hardened into a surprisingly sturdy shield against the wind. Inside, the heat from the hearth and animals lingered longer than one might expect. You run your hand along the wall, feeling the texture. Rough, gritty, slightly damp. In summer, the walls breathe and cool the air. In winter, they hold in every scrap of heat. The roof above, thick with thatch, droops over the eaves like a blanket. Rain or snow slides off easily, though the thatch must be tended carefully. Too dry, and it catches fire. Too wet, and rot sets in. The balance is delicate, as everything in this life seems to be. Curiously, some villages plastered the interior walls with a thin layer of lime, not only for brightness but to keep insects away. The pale coating caught what little light entered through the oiled linen windows, turning the dim room into something gentler. You can imagine that faint glow reflecting off a pot, or the soft shimmer it cast on a sleeping child's face. Inside, you take in the cottage's small details. The smoke hole above the hearth lets in a trickle of air and a stream of light. The floor, packed earth, is swept clean each morning with a bundle of reeds. A wooden stool sits near the fire, blackened at its legs from years of heat. Against one wall, a low bed stuffed with straw, covered in coarse linen. Everything has a place, not out of neatness but necessity. Space is precious when warmth must be shared. Archaeological evidence suggests that some families built sleeping platforms above the main living area, close to the smoke that rose from the fire. It sounds unpleasant, but the air there was warmest. The smell of wood and soot clung to their hair and clothes, a scent that became part of life itself. You can almost feel it, the mix of comfort and claustrophobia that defined a winter's night. You crouch near the hearth again. The ash glows faintly as you stir it with a stick, uncovering one surviving ember. Relief floods you. You add dry twigs and blow gently, watching the spark take hold. Smoke swirls upward, stinging your eyes, and then the orange light returns. The fire's warmth creeps outward, slow but certain. An interesting note from a 14th century manor account lists payments for reed for roofing and dung for daubing, proof that even building materials were traded commodities. Some villages organized communal thatching days, where neighbors worked together to mend one another's roofs before the heavy snow arrived. The air would have been filled with laughter, chatter, and the rustle of straw, a kind of celebration of mutual endurance. You picture it now, a group of villagers standing on ladders, passing bundles of thatch, their faces bright with exertion. Below, children stamp the straw flat or fetch water to mix with clay. When the roof is finished, someone pours a bit of ale on the ground as thanks. The homes, patched and strong again, gleam golden before the winter storms. Modern experts often discuss whether medieval homes were unbearably smoky or simply cozy by the standards of the time. Some argue that constant exposure to soot caused chronic lung problems, especially among children. Others note that the smoke preserved the timber and dried the air, preventing damp rot. You breathe in deeply and think both might be true. The same smoke that burns your eyes also keeps your walls standing. You take a moment to look around. Your small world feels solid again. The flicker of light turns the shadows gentle. The low ceiling traps the heat, and you feel the warmth rising from the fire, softening your numb fingers. You hear the soft creak of the roof beams, the murmur of someone outside brushing snow from their door. There is comfort in this simple shelter. The cottage is not elegant or grand, but it protects you. The walls remember your labor, the roof remembers your touch. You understand now why people speak of home as something alive. In the dead of winter, it breathes with you, creaks with you, and holds you close. As the day brightens, you open the door again and let a sliver of cold light fall across the floor. You stand there for a moment, halfway between frost and flame, and smile faintly. Outside is a world of ice and danger. Inside, there is warmth, however fleeting. This balance between shelter and storm is what keeps you alive. You close the door again, the latch clicking softly, and let the darkness cradle you for a little longer. The barn greets you with the soft, steady sound of animals breathing. You push open the door, and a wave of warmth hits you damp, heavy, and alive. The air smells of hay, dung, and the musky scent of fur. For a moment, you simply stand there, letting the sudden contrast from the frozen morning settle into your bones. This place, noisy and fragrant, is another kind of hearth. Your boots sink into the straw as you step further in. A cow shifts its weight and turns its great dark eyes toward you. A horse stamps, snorting steam into the air. Chickens huddle near the corner, their feathers puffed like small clouds. The animals are not just beasts of burden, they are your companions through the cold, your shared warmth against the season's indifference. Written accounts from the 14th century describe peasants keeping smaller livestock, goats, pigs, and sometimes even chickens inside their homes during the harshest months. The body heat from animals could raise the temperature of a cottage by several degrees, just enough to keep frost from biting through the night. It was a practical, if noisy, solution. You smile faintly at the thought of children sleeping beside bleating goats, lulled by the steady rhythm of chewing and breathing. Archaeologists have found signs of this close relationship in ancient floors layered with both animal dung and ash, proof that people and livestock once shared not only space but life itself. The mingling of warmth and waste may sound unpleasant to modern ears, yet in a world without glass, stoves, or insulation, this was the difference between living and freezing. You move along the row of stalls, brushing a cow's flank as you pass. The coarse fur is warm beneath your palm. She shifts slightly, her bell clinking faintly, a soft metallic lullaby. You take comfort in that sound. These creatures depend on you, but in truth, you depend on them just as much. A curious note from a medieval agricultural manual advises that animals be fed before humans during winter. For their labor is your bread, it warns. And it is true. If the oxen fall ill, the plough lies idle. If the hens stop laying, the pot remains empty. Their care comes first. You scoop a handful of grain and scatter it on the floor. The chickens peck eagerly, their small claws scratching against the frozen straw. The stable's low beams drip with condensation, and the walls are streaked with the marks of countless winters. You notice how the building's shape traps heat: low roof, few windows, and thick walls of timber and packed clay. Every design choice speaks of endurance. Even the door is hung low so that entering means bending slightly, a reminder to stay humble in the presence of survival. Some scholars suggest that medieval farmers developed an almost spiritual connection with their animals. Blessings were spoken over cows before milking, pigs were marked with symbols for luck, and herders sang to their flocks in the night to calm them. Whether these rituals were true acts of devotion or simply ways to soothe weary hearts, no one can say for certain. But as you listen to the quiet sounds of breathing and shuffling, you understand how easily gratitude could become reverence. You reach for a wooden pail of warm water, dipping your fingers in before pouring it into a trough. The steam curls upward, faint and ghost-like. You can feel the cold nibbling at your face again, but inside the barn, life still moves. You kneel to check the straw bedding, adding a fresh layer where it has gone damp. The work is simple, repetitive, and strangely peaceful. An old superstition whispers that cows could see spirits on Christmas Eve, a belief so deep that some families crept to the barns at midnight to listen for the animals speaking. You picture it, villagers huddled in the dark, their breath white in the air, waiting for a sign that the world beyond frost still cared for them. Perhaps no words ever came, but the faith in that moment must have felt like warmth itself. Modern historians note that such stories carried a hidden wisdom. They encouraged people to check on their animals during the coldest nights, ensuring none froze or fell sick. A tale dressed as miracle became, in truth, a habit of kindness. You smile, realizing how often belief disguises practicality in these winters. The animals stir again, sensing movement. The pigs grunt softly, rolling against one another for comfort. A hen flutters onto a beam, feathers shaking snow from her wings. You crouch, resting your hands on your knees, and watch them with quiet affection. They are the heartbeat of the village, constant and patient. Outside, the wind howls across the open fields, but inside, you feel the steady pulse of warmth that life provides. The barn is a world apart, lit dimly by the small light that seeps through cracks in the boards. The air hums with breath and sound, the symphony of coexistence that has kept humankind alive since the first fires were lit. You take one last look before stepping back into the cold. The door creaks shut behind you, and the sudden silence of the snow feels almost too empty. You pull your cloak tighter, carrying the barn's warmth inside your chest like a hidden ember. Every living creature in the village, from the smallest hen to the broadest ox, shares the same truth as you. To live through the cold, you must stay close to one another. You walk home with that thought, your breath trailing behind you, and it feels like an ancient prayer carried on the frozen wind. The morning sky is the color of pewter, dull and still. You hear the first toll of the church bell long before you see the chapel. Its sound travels over the frost, slow and solemn, calling the village to prayer. The sound feels heavy, like an anchor dropped into silence. You pull your cloak around your shoulders and begin walking toward the hill where the church stands, its outline faint against the pale sky. The path crunches beneath your boots, frost clings to the hedges, and every breath leaves a small ghost behind. Ahead, others walk the same road. Men, women, and children bundled in layers, heads bowed against the cold. Their faces are solemn, though not sorrowful. Faith, for them, is not comfort, it is survival. When everything else freezes, prayer remains warm. Written records from parish accounts show that, even in the poorest villages, the church was the one structure built to endure. Its thick stone walls held heat better than timber cottages, and its roof, steep and strong, shed snow like a shield. The bell tower, visible from every field, reminded people that someone or something was always watching over them. You push open the wooden door, and the smell of tallow and cold stone greets you. Inside, it is dim but warmer than outside. Candles flicker in iron holders, their flames bending with the draught. The air is filled with a faint haze of smoke and the scent of pine branches laid across the altar for winter. People kneel slowly on the flagstones, murmuring prayers that rise and fade like breath. It is generally accepted among historians that religion in the Middle Ages provided more than spiritual hope, it was the social glue that kept villages alive. The church distributed food to the needy, offered shelter to travelers, and recorded every birth, death, and marriage. Yet faith was also a form of order, binding people to the rhythm of the year through feast days and fasts. You find a place near the back, lowering yourself onto the cold stone. Your knees ache. The priest's voice echoes softly through the hall, speaking in Latin, a language most here cannot understand. It hardly matters. The rhythm of the words, the rise and fall of sound is what comforts. You close your eyes and listen. The chant feels ancient, steady, like the heartbeat of the season itself. Curiously, some parishes lit special fires inside the church during harsh winters, known as holy warmth. The faithful would carry embers home afterward to rekindle their own hearths, believing that the sacred flame would protect them from sickness and hunger. You imagine the sight, villagers leaving in a long line, each holding a small clay pot glowing faintly through the night, their faces lit by faith and flame. The walls are cold to the touch. You trace a finger along the rough stone, feeling the moisture that seeps through. Above you, the faint light of morning filters through stained glass, painting thin lines of colour across the floor. The image is of Saint Nicholas, the patron of sailors and children, holding a golden staff. His eyes seem almost kind. You think of how many winters these walls have seen, how many prayers they have absorbed. A faint cough echoes behind you, then the shuffle of boots. You turn slightly and see an old woman clutching a small wooden cross. Her lips move silently as she rocks back and forth. Faith here is private, almost physical, a gesture, a whisper, a habit of endurance. No one looks at her, yet everyone understands. Documents from church chronicles mention the practice of rogation prayers during bitter winters. People walked through the fields, chanting and sprinkling holy water to bless the soil, even when it lay frozen solid. It was a ritual of hope, a promise to the land that they would return in spring. You picture yourself joining that procession, the cold burning your cheeks as your voice mingles with dozens of others. Modern researchers still discuss how deeply superstition intertwined with faith during these times. Some see it as ignorance, others as necessity. When the world offered so little control, belief became a language of survival. You sense that truth now as you watch the villagers bow their heads. Their prayers are not about paradise, but about endurance, about seeing another dawn without frost in their lungs. The priest raises his hand, and the murmur quiets. For a moment, all you hear is the faint hiss of the candles. You look around and realize how every person here carries the same tiredness in their eyes, the same quiet strength. When the final Amen sounds, it feels like a shared exhale. You step outside again. The cold greets you sharply, but the world seems brighter now. The bell tolls once more, deep and low. Around you, people scatter back toward their cottages, their breath rising like smoke. A child laughs suddenly, chasing a puff of snow, and the sound feels almost sacred. You stand at the foot of the church hill for a while, watching the smoke from your own chimney in the distance. The air smells faintly of wood and winter. Faith may not fill your belly or warm your hands, but it fills the spaces between the long hours, the silences, the fears that creep in after dark. It gives shape to waiting. As you walk home, the sun breaks through for a moment, turning the snow to a glittering sheet of light. The bell's final echo fades behind you. You realize that even in this frozen landscape, people have built warmth not only from fire, but from belief. In the face of endless winter, faith is another kind of flame. The day feels softer than most. The air carries the scent of smoke and ale, and laughter drifts from the direction of the manor yard. You follow the sound, your boots crunching lightly over a crust of snow. The villagers have gathered, huddled together against the cold, faces glowing with the promise of food and firelight. For one brief night in the long winter, the hunger loosens its grip, and warmth comes not from the hearth but from the crowd itself. You draw closer and see a fire blazing in the center of the square. Sparks leap upward, caught by the wind, and vanish into the pale sky. A man with a lute strums lazily by the flames, the notes thin but bright. Someone passes you a mug of ale, heavy and warm, its surface foaming faintly. You take a sip, and the bitterness mingles with the smoky air. Around you, voices rise in song. Historical notes from parish accounts describe how communities held feasts during the bleakest months, often tied to holy days or local saints. Christmas, Candlemas, and the Feast of St. Bridget were not merely religious events, they were excuses for release. A chance to taste something rich, to remember joy before the next stretch of hardship. For a few hours, rules loosened, hunger paused, and the cold seemed less cruel. On the table nearby, you see the food: coarse bread, salt pork glistening with fat, roasted turnips, and a single goose that must have taken months of saving. Its smell fills the square, thick and irresistible. Children hover near, eyes wide. The first cut releases a hiss of steam, and the warmth of it feels like magic. You are handed a small slice, crisp and smoky, and when you bite into it, your mind quiets completely. Curiously, village records reveal that even the poorest shared in these feasts, often through alms tables set outside churches. Wealthier families contributed extra bread or meat so that none would be left out. You picture a row of rough benches dusted with snow, covered in baskets of food, candles flickering beside them. Generosity, for once, outshines scarcity. You sit beside an old man who nurses a cup of ale. His beard glitters with frost, and his smile reveals more gaps than teeth. He begins telling you about the last winter, when the snow lasted until Easter and people boiled bark to make soup. Yet, he laughs as he speaks, as if hardship were simply another tale to trade. His laughter ripples through you like warmth. Researchers note that such gatherings were vital for morale. Laughter and song broke the monotony that winter pressed upon the mind. Without them, despair settled in too deeply. The songs were not always cheerful. Some told of famine, lost lovers, or saints freezing on lonely mountains, but they turned pain into rhythm. And rhythm, in times like these, kept people human. A fiddler begins to play. The melody is quick, bright, almost defiant. The villagers join hands, dancing in a circle, boots stamping against snow. Their movements stir clouds of white powder that shimmer in the firelight. For a moment, it feels as if the stars themselves have come down to dance among you. Some old sources mention that fasting followed feasting almost immediately. The church calendar balanced indulgence with abstinence, pleasure with penitence. One day you might feast on meat and ale. The next you might chew only cold porridge and pray for forgiveness. You think about that as you sip your ale again, the sweetness turning bitter on your tongue. Perhaps the rhythm of feast and fast was another way of staying sane, a heartbeat for the long year. You glance around at the faces glowing in the firelight. The baker's wife, her hands still dusted with flour, the blacksmith's apprentice, laughing as he slips on ice, the children, chasing one another through the snow with shrieks of delight. Even the priest watches from the edge, smiling faintly beneath his hood. It feels as if the entire village exhales together. One local legend claims that the fire of a winter feast could drive away illness if you stared into it long enough. You catch yourself gazing into the flames, eyes watering, as if trying to believe. The logs crack, the sparks rise, and you imagine each one carrying a small prayer upward. In the dance of light and shadow, you see the outline of faces, past and future people who have endured winters just like this. When the music slows, the crowd quiets. Someone tells a story about Saint Martin, who shared his cloak with a beggar in the snow. Another recalls the tale of a ghostly rider who brings frost to fields that are not blessed in time. The stories mix faith and fear until they feel like the same thing. You sit close to the fire, feeling the edges of your mind soften, lulled by the rhythm of words. As the embers fade, people drift home one by one. The laughter grows quieter, replaced by the crunch of boots and the soft snort of horses in the distance. You linger a moment longer, letting the heat of the dying fire warm your face. The night sky above you is black and brilliant, stars scattered like spilled salt. You finish the last sip of ale and stand. The cold rushes back immediately, fierce and honest. You tuck your hands into your sleeves and begin walking home. Behind you, the last of the flames collapse into a bed of red coals. You think of how much work tomorrow will bring chopping wood, mending fences, feeding animals, but for now, the warmth of the feast lingers. Winter has not ended. Hunger will return. But tonight, your belly is full, your heart lighter, and in that balance of cold and comfort, you find the quiet truth of survival. You wake in the half-light of morning, your throat raw from the cold. The air feels heavy, as if it carries frost inside it. Outside, the world is white and silent, but inside your body, something aches. You cough softly, tasting iron at the back of your mouth. Sickness moves quietly through the village this time of year, and everyone knows it. You sit up slowly, wrapping a blanket around your shoulders. The fire has burned low again, and the cottage smells of ash and damp wool. Your fingers tremble slightly as you poke at the embers, coaxing a small flame to life. The warmth feels weak, as though the fire itself is tired. Historical accounts written by monks often describe the winter as the season of fevers. The cold did not bring only frostbite. It brought hunger, weakness, and the lingering coughs that carried off the old and the young alike. With little fresh food and long months trapped indoors, illness spread easily. Still, villagers found ways to fight back, using remedies gathered from fields and hedgerows when the earth was still green. You pour a little warm water into a clay cup and drop in a spoonful of honey. It glows amber in the light, thick and slow. This is medicine, as close as most will ever come to sweetness. The warmth coats your throat, and for a moment, the pain eases. Records from apothecaries show that honey, garlic, and vinegar were the most trusted remedies for colds. Not always effective, but comfort mattered as much as cure. Curiously, some people warmed ale with herbs, rosemary, sage, or even pepper, and drank it before bed to chase out the chill. The smell of spiced drink fills your imagination. Rich, earthy, slightly bitter. It must have tasted like relief. In some places, healers mixed crushed juniper berries with lard to rub on aching joints. You imagine the sharp, clean scent filling the air, a strange kind of luxury in such a rough world. The village healer, usually an older woman, was as important as any priest. She learned her craft through observation, memory, and rumor. You picture her now, wrapped in shawls, sitting beside her hearth surrounded by jars of dried leaves, roots, and powders. Her table is cluttered with small miracles: willow bark for pain, nettles for strength, elderflower for fever. People come to her quietly, not only for medicine but for reassurance. A Latin medical text, copied in a monastery, once warned, "Trust in herbs, but more in God." That balance between prayer and practice defined medieval healing. Sometimes, a charm was tied around the neck, a scrap of parchment with a verse from the Psalms to ward off sickness. It was part science, part faith, part hope. And hope, as you know, is often the strongest medicine of all. You step outside, the cold biting at your lungs. The air smells of pine smoke and something sharper, a metallic scent that seems to live only in winter. You walk toward the stream at the edge of the village, a small pot in hand. The healer has told you that water drawn at sunrise carries more strength. The surface of the stream is covered with a thin layer of ice, delicate and glassy. You break it gently with a stick and watch ripples spread outward. The sound of trickling water feels like life returning. Back home, you set the pot by the fire and sprinkle in dried mint. The scent rises softly, filling the room with a green memory of summer. You sip slowly, feeling warmth spread through your chest. It is not much, but it is enough to remind you that healing is not always about curing, it is about enduring. An odd note in a 15th century household manual recommends keeping a live hen indoors when someone is sick, claiming that the bird draws away the bad humors. You smile at the thought of it, a chicken pacing near the hearth, clucking quietly, as if discussing the patient's condition. Absurd, perhaps, yet strangely tender. The line between superstition and care is thin, and in these times, kindness itself can heal. You glance toward the small wooden cross above your door. It is blackened by smoke, its edges rough. Many families touched such charms before sleep, believing they guarded against night air, a term for the unseen illnesses that crept through cracks and dreams. The faith may not be scientific, but it has comforted generations. You touch it now, more from habit than belief, and whisper a small wish to stay alive until spring. Modern scholars often wonder how people face sickness without despair. The answer, perhaps, lies in the rhythm of the village itself. When one fell ill, others stepped in. Neighbors shared broth, fetched water, or watched children. No one had the luxury of isolation. Illness belonged to everyone, and so did recovery. You rest again by the fire, listening to it crackle softly. Outside, the wind sighs across the roof. Somewhere, a dog barks once and falls silent. You feel your eyelids grow heavy. The honey's warmth lingers in your throat, sweet and slow. The pain dulls into something manageable. You think about how fragile the line between sickness and health truly is, and how the villagers walk it every day with quiet grace. There are no hospitals here, no doctors in long robes, just human patients and a few leaves in a jar. And somehow, that is enough. You close your eyes. The fire's glow paints faint gold on the walls. Your breathing steadies, each exhale a promise that you are still here. In the world of frost and faith, survival is not about strength, it is about tenderness, persistence, and the belief that tomorrow might be kinder. The night stretches long again, deeper than before. The firelight trembles on the walls, soft and uneven, painting shapes that shift with the smoke. You sit close to the hearth, watching the shadows move, and realize how much the winter binds people together. The longer the darkness lasts, the closer everyone sits. Outside, the snow presses against the walls, but inside, something else stirs. Laughter, whispers, and the slow blooming of affection. In a world of endless cold, warmth is more than fire. It is touch, voice, and presence. You glance across the room at another figure by the flames, perhaps mending a cloak or combing tangled hair. The silence between you is gentle, filled with the sound of crackling wood and quiet breathing. There is a comfort in this stillness, a wordless knowing that neither of you is truly alone. Documents from medieval courts and letters reveal that winter was often the season of courtship. Long nights left plenty of time for stories, songs, and companionship. Marriage arrangements were rarely romantic in a modern sense, yet affection still found ways to bloom in corners of cottages and during village gatherings. When there was nothing else to do but wait for spring, hearts learned to invent warmth of their own. You watch the candle flicker beside you. Its light softens everything. Faces, voices, gestures. In a room lit only by flame, beauty is less about perfection and more about the way light catches an eye or the sound of a laugh. Even calloused hands look graceful in firelight. You find yourself smiling without meaning to. Curiously, some folklore claims that winter love was especially lucky, since promises made in the cold would last longer. Lovers exchanged tokens carved from wood or small pieces of cloth, sewn secretly into garments. Sometimes a girl might weave a lock of hair into a man's glove before he went to the fields again, believing it would keep his heart loyal. Such gestures were small, but they were the stuff of eternity in a world measured by hardship. You think of a young couple sitting near the barn earlier that day, their hands barely touching beneath a shared cloak. They had been laughing about something trivial, a frozen bucket, perhaps, but their eyes lingered on each other just a moment too long. In this world, that moment is enough. Love does not arrive with trumpets. It grows quietly between chores. in stolen glances and shared warmth. Archaeological finds have even uncovered small rings carved from bone or pewter, worn smooth by time. They were not symbols of wealth, but of intention, promises whispered rather than shouted. Some were engraved with simple words, "I am yours." You can imagine one exchanged by firelight, the giver shy and trembling, the receiver smiling through the smoke. Not all unions were gentle, of course. Parish registers tell stories of arranged marriages, of dowries paid in livestock or wool. For many, love was a negotiation rather than a discovery. Yet even within these arrangements, tenderness found space to breathe. Shared work, shared beds, shared fears. All of these built something that felt, over time, like love. Modern historians sometimes debate how much emotion colored medieval marriages. Some argue that affection was secondary to survival, while others point to poetry, songs, and private letters filled with longing. You suspect the truth lies somewhere between. Love existed not despite the cold, but because of it. When every day was a battle against nature, people held each other tighter. You hear laughter outside the window now, muffled by snow. Two figures pass by, their shadows stretching long in the moonlight. You imagine them walking to the edge of the frozen field, their breath mingling in the air. Maybe they will carve their initials into the bark of an old oak. Maybe they will simply stand together, saying nothing, feeling the night around them. Inside, the fire pops loudly, and you are reminded that warmth must always be tended. You stir the coals, the flame flaring briefly, bright enough to illuminate the rough wooden walls. The glow catches on a bundle of herbs hanging near the ceiling, lavender and rosemary, saved from summer. Their scent drifts faintly through the room, and you breathe it in. It smells of life, memory, and something almost like hope. An entry from a manor's household ledger once mentioned a wedding in frost, where the entire feast took place indoors because the snow outside reached the roof. The guests drank warm ale, the bride wore wool lined with squirrel fur, and the priest's hands shook so much from the cold that he nearly dropped the ring. Yet they all laughed, and the record ends with the words, "They danced till dawn." You picture that scene now, the joy of it shining through centuries. You lean back and close your eyes. The fire hums softly, the air thick with warmth, and the faint sound of someone humming in the next room. The tune is slow, winding, full of quiet yearning. Love, in its simplest form, is survival shared between two hearts. The snow can pile high, the frost can bite, but inside these walls, the pulse of connection beats stronger than the wind outside. You drift towards sleep. The last thing you see, the soft glow of firelight on the face across from you, calm and content. Outside, winter reigns. Inside, there is only warmth. The morning begins with the laughter of children, thin and bright against the muffled quiet of snow. You open your eyes to the sound and feel a pang of surprise. In the midst of hardship, laughter still exists. Outside, their small figures dart between drifts, their cloaks flying behind them like tattered wings. Their cheeks glow crimson, their boots sink deep, and their joy seems to warm the air itself. You step outside and watch them play. One rolls a ball of snow as large as himself, while another shrieks and tumbles backward into the powder. Their shouts echo across the frozen fields, bouncing off cottages and fences. It is a rare kind of music, one that momentarily silences the ache of hunger or the weight of labor. You cannot help but smile. Childhood, even here, refuses to surrender. Records from parish schools and manorial rolls reveal that most children in rural villages began work as soon as they could walk steadily. By 7 or 8, they fetched water, gathered sticks, or tended small animals. Yet winter gave them a strange sort of freedom. With the fields frozen and chores fewer, the long dark months became a playground carved in frost. You watch as one girl pulls her brother on a sled made from a wooden board. The rope creaks, the snow squeaks beneath their feet, and their laughter rings out again. Simple things, a stick, a bone, a frozen puddle become toys in their hands. You remember that play is not luxury, it is practice for life, teaching endurance and imagination all at once. Curiously, some chronicles mention that children invented games specific to winter. They built snow forts to mimic castles, pretending to be lords and knights. Others shaped small ice figures, pressing berries into them for eyes. In parts of northern Europe, youngsters carried sticks tipped with glowing embers at dusk, pretending they were torches to chase away spirits. The mix of superstition and play blurred beautifully, as if laughter itself could guard against the dark. You kneel to help one small boy repair his mitten. The wool is frayed, the stitches uneven. He grins up at you, his teeth chattering, and proudly announces that he made it himself. You nod in admiration, though you can see that his fingers are already red with cold. He darts away again, fearless, his energy defying the weather. Children, it seems, do not notice the cold until night falls. Old accounts by clerics sometimes complained about the unruly joy of youth in snow, describing how children interrupted prayers or slipped away from chores to play outside. Yet the same texts admit that even the elders smiled to see it. Winter was harsh enough without denying its few delights. The sound of children laughing was a reminder that life persisted, that the world still held innocence amid hunger and grief. As the morning brightens, the older children return to work. A boy carries a bucket of feed to the barn. Two girls kneel by the stream, breaking the ice with small sticks to fill their pails. They chatter as they work, teasing one another. You notice how skilled their hands already are, strong, quick, and sure. Childhood here is short, but it leaves behind capable souls. Archaeologists have found small shoes, tiny wooden spoons, and carved toys buried near old cottages. A doll made of rags, a miniature cart whittled from oak. Each one tells a quiet story of love. Even the poorest parents found time to carve, sew, or patch something to bring a smile to a child's face. In a world of scarcity, affection expressed itself in effort. You watch a group of children gather around a frozen puddle, sliding across it in turns. Their balance is poor, their laughter constant. One falls, giggles, and scrambles up again. You can almost feel the cold through your own palms, the sting of frost meeting skin. Yet you also feel something warmer, a kind of admiration for their resilience. They accept winter not as an enemy but as a playground. Modern historians often discuss how children in the Middle Ages were treated more as miniature adults than as innocents. They worked, obeyed, and contributed from a young age. Still, the evidence of toys, songs, and lullabies tells another truth. They were cherished, protected when possible, and loved fiercely within the limits of the time. Survival may have hardened people, but it did not erase tenderness. You glance toward one small cottage where a mother kneels near the door, calling her children inside. They groan, unwilling to leave the snow, but her voice brooks no argument. One by one they trudge in, dragging wet cloaks and laughing under their breath. You follow them with your eyes until the door closes and smoke curls again from the chimney. Inside, they will huddle by the fire, drying their mittens and sharing a bowl of broth. The afternoon grows quieter. You walk along the path where their footprints crisscross the snow. The marks tell stories: the drag of a sled, the hop of a game, the scuffle of a playful fight. Soon the wind will erase them, but for now, they are proof that life persists even in the coldest season. As evening falls, you hear a lullaby float from one of the cottages. The voice is soft, cracked by fatigue, but the melody carries easily through the still air. It tells of a child sleeping safe through winter, watched over by stars and angels. You pause, letting the sound sink into you. The snow glows faintly in the moonlight, and for the first time in days, you feel warmth spread through your chest, not from fire, but from the sheer stubbornness of joy. You turn back toward your own hearth, smiling quietly. The laughter of children fades into the wind, but its echo lingers like a promise. Life, it seems, has many ways to endure. The air outside feels different tonight, still and sharp, as if listening. You step out into the dark, the snow crunching softly beneath your boots. The moon hangs low, its pale light spreading across the empty fields. The village behind you is quiet, smoke trailing thinly from the chimneys. You can hear only the faint howl of wind beyond the trees. And somewhere, farther off, a sound that raises the hairs on your neck. It is not quite a howl, not quite a growl, something between the two. You stop and strain your ears. The sound comes again, low and distant, rolling across the frozen ground. Wolves. Every villager knows that sound. It carries through winter like a warning, reminding you that the world outside your cottage is not yours alone. Written records from manorial accounts mention payments made for wolf pelts in harsh winters. Lords offered bounties, not for sport but for survival. Packs prowled closer to villages when food grew scarce. Livestock vanished. Sometimes, children too. The wolves were as real as hunger and as constant as fear. You glance toward the forest's edge, its outline dark and ragged against the snow. Curiously, in folklore, wolves were not only feared but respected. Some villagers believed they carried the souls of the restless dead, wandering until the thaw released them. Others claimed that if you met a wolf and did not show fear, it would pass you by unharmed. So you stand still now, your breath shallow, watching the horizon. The forest stirs slightly, but the sound fades. You exhale, half relieved, half awed. You walk slowly along the boundary of the field. The moonlight glints off the frozen fences, each one crusted with frost. A thin layer of mist hugs the ground, swirling around your legs. The cold bites at your cheeks, but you keep moving, the silence broken only by your own footsteps. Out here, the world feels endless and ancient. A parchment from a 14th century abbey warns travelers not to cross certain woods after sunset. The beasts are hungry, and the saints asleep, it says. You wonder if fear itself was part of survival, an instinct passed down to keep people cautious. The forest beyond the village has always been both gift and threat. It offers fuel and game, but it also hides teeth and shadows. You pause at the edge of the trees. The branches creak in the wind, their shapes twisting like skeletal fingers. The snow muffles everything, and for a moment, you feel as though you are the only living soul in the world. You step closer, the smell of pine and damp earth reaching your nose. Then another sound, a faint rustle, followed by the snap of a twig. You freeze. Your heart thuds once, heavy and loud. Then you see it, a flash of movement between the trunks, something grey and low. The shape glides soundlessly, then stops, watching. Two eyes catch the moonlight, glowing pale. The creature stands still, tail lowered, breath visible in small bursts. A wolf, lean and thin, ribs visible even from here. You hold your ground, neither running nor shouting. The moment stretches, brittle as ice. Old stories say that wolves can sense fear the way fire senses air. You force yourself to stay calm, though your fingers tremble. The animal blinks, sniffs the air once, then turns and melts into the dark. Only silence remains. You exhale slowly, your breath white against the black trees. The forest keeps its secrets. Later, as you walk back toward the village, you think of how the wolves are not the only things lurking beyond the light. People whisper about other shapes in the dark spirits of the frozen dead, or the night riders, said to roam on stormy nights. Some claim to have seen pale figures moving across the snow, their faces hidden, their feet leaving no prints. Whether real or imagined, such tales keep villagers near their fires after dusk. Modern scholars often discuss how fear of wilderness shaped medieval life. To live so close to the forest meant to live beside uncertainty. The line between myth and memory blurred easily. For every wolf, there were 10 ghost stories. For every missing sheep, a tale of curses or retribution. Yet these stories also gave meaning to what could not be controlled. They turned danger into narrative, chaos into lesson. You pass the last fence before the cottages. A light flickers faintly through the window of your home, golden against the snow. The sight steadies you. Behind those walls, warmth and safety wait. Still, you glance back at the forest one last time. The wind moves through it like a sigh, rustling branches that seem to whisper. You cannot tell if it is farewell or warning. Inside, you close the door and bar it. The fire crackles softly, and the scent of smoke feels comforting again. You sit near the flames, hands outstretched, trying to shake the cold from your skin. Your heartbeat slows, though your ears still ring with the memory of that low, distant howl. An entry from a Scandinavian chronicle mentions villagers gathering each night to pray for protection against wolves. The priest would sprinkle salt in a circle and light candles in every window. You picture that same ritual here, the flickering lights of a dozen homes shining like stars in the dark. Perhaps it is not just to keep the wolves away, but to remind one another that no one faces the night alone. You close your eyes and listen. The wind hums softly beyond the door, and the fire shifts, its light steady and golden. Somewhere deep in the woods, another howl rises, faint and mournful, but you feel no fear now. The sound is simply part of winter, as old and necessary as the cold itself. You let it fade into the night and breathe again, grateful for the walls that hold you and the flame that still burns. Morning breaks in a haze of white mist. The air tastes of smoke and salt, and the sound of creaking wheels cuts through the quiet. You open the door and see them at last. A line of merchants making their way along the frozen road. Their carts are piled high with barrels and bundles wrapped in cloth, each one coated in frost. The horses snort clouds of steam, hooves clattering against the hard ground. Travellers are rare in the deep of winter, and their arrival stirs the village like the promise of spring. You pull your cloak tighter and step closer. The merchants call greetings, their voices rough from the cold. Their accents sound strange, touched with the north or the coast, the rhythms of faraway markets. They bring news as well as trade, and both are precious. People gather quickly, drawn by curiosity. The square fills with chatter, the clink of coins, and the smell of damp wool. Manorial records show that trade never fully stopped in winter. Though roads were dangerous and rivers frozen, merchants adapted. They used sledges instead of wagons, skated across frozen waterways, or followed the safer ridges that held their weight. Salt, dried fish, cloth, and iron nails were the lifeblood of the season. Without them, even the best prepared villages might crumble before spring. One man unwraps a bundle to reveal coarse wool dyed deep blue. The color glows against the snow like a miracle. A woman gasps softly, reaching out to touch it. Another merchant opens a cask and lifts the lid. The scent of salted herring fills the air, sharp and briny. You can almost taste the sea in it, and for a moment you imagine waves instead of snowdrifts, gulls instead of crows. Curiously, in some towns, winter markets became celebrations rather than hardships. When rivers froze thick enough, people set up stalls directly on the ice. These frost fairs turned danger into delight. Candles flickered, music played, and goods from distant lands gleamed beneath the low winter Sunday. You think of that now, as the merchants spread their wares upon the packed snow, turning your quiet village into something almost festive. You wander among the carts, your breath visible in the air. There are barrels of salt, sacks of barley, a few pots of honey sealed with wax. One man sells leather gloves lined with fur. You slip a pair onto your stiff fingers and feel instant relief. He smiles knowingly and names his price. It is too much, of course, but you trade a small pouch of dried herbs instead. His eyes brighten at the scent. A fair bargain. An old document from the Hanseatic League mentions winter caravans that crossed half of Europe, bringing Baltic salt, English wool, and Mediterranean oil to inland towns. You marvel at that courage, men facing ice, wolves, and storms for the sake of trade. The roads were treacherous, the inns few. Yet their journeys connected worlds, linking one frozen village to another through shared need. You pause by a merchant who carries trinkets instead of necessities. Small mirrors, tin brooches, ribbons of foreign silk. They seem out of place here among the coarse fabrics and salted meat. Yet the villagers press close. Even in hardship, people crave beauty. A young girl holds a glass bead up to the light, and her eyes widen as it catches the Sunday. You feel that same spark inside you, a reminder that color still exists, that life is not only grey and white. Another merchant sells candles of beeswax, golden and smooth. The scent is soft and sweet, a whisper of summer. You buy one, not for light, but for hope. The wax warms beneath your thumb, and you tuck it carefully into your cloak. You can almost hear the bees buzzing somewhere far away in memory. Scholars note that merchants were also messengers, carrying news faster than letters could travel. From them, villagers learned of wars, kings, famines, and miracles. Today's gossip is simpler. Someone heard that spring has already begun in the south, that a monastery near the coast is rebuilding after a storm, that a distant fair sold bread made from chestnuts. The stories move from mouth to mouth, warming the imagination like ale by the fire. A gust of wind rattles the cart wheels. Snow swirls around the square, and the merchants begin packing their goods again. The visit will not last long. They must reach the next village before the light fades. You help one man fasten a strap, his fingers trembling from the cold. He thanks you and presses a small token into your palm, a coin stamped with a foreign crest. You turn it over, tracing the design with your thumb. It feels heavier than its size should allow, as if it carries the weight of all the roads he has travelled. As they leave, the villagers wave, their voices carrying across the snow. The sound lingers after the carts disappear behind the trees. For a moment, the air feels empty again, the silence returning like a tide. Yet something has changed. You can sense it in the people's movements, in their eyes. The merchants have brought not only goods, but the reminder that the world is larger than this valley, that beyond the frost there are cities, seas, and seasons still turning. You walk back to your cottage slowly, the foreign coin warm in your hand. Smoke rises from chimneys again, and laughter drifts faintly through the air. You glance toward the horizon where the travellers vanished, their tracks already filling with snow. Somewhere out there, another village waits, another fire burns, and life continues its endless exchange. As you reach your door, you pause and look up. The sky is pale and still, but it no longer feels empty. The world feels connected, woven together by the paths of those who dare to keep moving through the cold. You tuck the coin into your pouch, open the door, and let the warmth of the hearth draw you in. The day begins with a grey stillness. The sky presses low, heavy with unfallen snow, and the air smells faintly of smoke and iron. You walk toward the manor house, following the narrow path that winds up the hill. The cottages grow smaller behind you, their chimneys breathing thin wisps into the pale morning light. Ahead, the manor rises like a different world entirely. Its walls of stone seem to hold a warmth that your little cottage could never know. The manor is not large by royal standards, but to the villagers it is a castle. Its windows are glazed with small panes of glass, catching what light there is and turning it into colour. The door stands tall, reinforced with iron. You can already hear sounds from within. Laughter, the clang of a pot, the muffled rhythm of boots on stone floors. Life inside the manor feels broader, louder, more confident. Historical documents from estate records show that winter in the manor was a season of comfort and power. While the peasants struggled to keep their hearths burning, the lord and his household dined by roaring fires, wrapped in fur and velvet. Yet their security depended on the same frozen soil that sustained the village. If the harvest failed, even the great hall felt the chill of scarcity. You step through the gate as a servant passes, carrying a basket of firewood toward the kitchen. She nods to you, eyes down, her breath rising in white plumes. The air inside smells of bread and roasted meat. Your stomach tightens instinctively, drawn to the scent. You follow the sound of voices to the great hall. The hall glows with firelight. A vast hearth fills one wall, flames leaping high enough to lick the iron spit turning slowly above it. The light dances on tapestries showing hunts and battles. At the long table, the lord sits wrapped in a mantle lined with fur, a cup of wine in hand. Beside him, his lady embroiders by candlelight. gold thread catching the glow. Curiously, inventories from noble households reveal that much of this comfort was illusion. Beneath the finery, the cold crept in. Even stone walls could not keep out the frost. Servants slept in corners under piles of wool, and water froze in the buckets overnight. You can see it now, the faint mist of breath even here, the goosebumps on uncovered hands. Wealth softened hardship, but could not erase it entirely. You watch as a page boy hurries past with a tray of steaming bread. The scent is intoxicating. The lord tears a piece and dips it into a bowl of broth rich with herbs and fat. He glances toward the window where snow has begun to fall again and sighs with contentment. For him, winter is not an enemy but a backdrop, a canvas that makes his fire burn brighter. Meanwhile, at the edge of the hall, the servants work quickly and quietly. They refill cups, stir the hearth, and sweep the rushes from the floor. Their hands are red and raw, their movements precise. You notice one girl rub her fingers together between tasks, trying to coax warmth back into them. She catches your eye for a brief moment, smiles faintly, then looks away. You think about how many lives unfold here within the same walls, all bound by hierarchy, yet all breathing the same cold air. A manor roll from the 15th century notes the seasonal obligations of the villagers, delivering grain, mending fences, repairing roofs. These tasks continued through winter, owed to the lord in exchange for protection and the right to live on his land. Some called it duty, others survival. You wonder how often gratitude and resentment shared the same space. It is said that the lord's generosity was measured by the size of his winter feast. Once or twice a year, he invited the villagers to eat in the hall, sharing bread and ale to show goodwill. You imagine that gathering now, the peasants entering hesitantly, their faces flushed from the heat, eyes wide at the sight of candles and silver. For one evening, class dissolved into warmth and laughter, and by morning, the world returned to its careful order. Modern historians still discuss how dependent both manor and village were on each other. The lord's wealth meant little without the labour of the fields, and the villagers' survival depended on his protection. The system, unequal though it was, functioned like a great wheel, each spoke turning the next. In winter, that balance was most visible, one side in comfort, the other in endurance. You stand quietly at the edge of the hall, the heat from the fire brushing your face. A hound sleeps near the hearth, its ears twitching with each pop of the wood. The lady rises from her seat and crosses the room, her gown whispering across the floor. She glances toward you briefly before speaking to a servant, her voice calm, almost musical. Her skin glows in the firelight, though her eyes look tired, distant. Even here, you realize, warmth can feel lonely. Outside, the snow thickens, covering footprints almost as soon as they are made. You leave the hall, stepping back into the cold. The air feels sharper now, honest in its chill. Behind you, laughter echoes faintly, muffled by stone. Ahead, the village waits, smaller but somehow more real. You think of your low cottage, smoky and cramped, and yet you find yourself longing for it. There, the warmth may be weak, but it belongs entirely to you. You make your way down the hill as night begins to fall. The wind stings your face, but the sound of the manor fades quickly, replaced by the quiet rhythm of the village wood being chopped, a baby crying, someone humming near a hearth. The contrast feels comforting. As you reach your door, you pause and glance back at the hill. The manor's windows glow faintly through the snow, golden dots in the darkness. You bow your head slightly, not out of obedience, but acknowledgement. Both worlds, rich and poor, must bow to the same winter. The frost makes equals of them all, at least for a breath. You open your door and step inside, where your small fire waits, steady and faithful as ever. The next morning is cloaked in silence, the kind that makes every sound feel sacred. The snow lies unbroken, soft and pure, and the air smells faintly of pine. You decide to walk toward the monastery that sits beyond the far ridge, half hidden among the trees. The path winds gently upward, your boots sinking into the snow. Each breath leaves a white plume behind you, vanishing as quickly as it forms. The sun barely rises, hovering low and pale, as if weary of its own task. The monastery's stone walls appear slowly through the mist. Its bell tower rises like a finger pointing toward heaven, the sound of the morning bell rolling across the valley. The notes are calm, unhurried, almost tender. As you draw closer, you notice how snow gathers in neat lines along the cloisters, untouched and perfectly still. It feels like stepping into another world, one ruled not by hunger or fear, but by rhythm and prayer. Records from the Benedictine and Cistercian orders describe winter as a season of discipline. Monks lived by routine, prayer, study, labor, and silence. They woke before dawn, their breath visible in the cold chapel, and recited psalms by candlelight. The stone floors were freezing beneath their bare feet, yet no one complained. Endurance itself was devotion. You imagine the echo of their voices now, a chorus of faith woven through frost. You enter through the wooden gate, greeted by a young novice carrying a pail of water. He nods politely and continues on, careful not to spill a drop. The bucket steams faintly, proof that it was drawn from the monastery's well, which never freezes entirely. The sound of his footsteps fades quickly in the still air. Inside, everything moves quietly, as if noise might break something delicate. Curiously, some monasteries developed ingenious ways to keep warm. Historical evidence shows that monks lined their robes with wool, built thick walls filled with straw for insulation, and even designed heating systems using clay pipes to channel warmth from the kitchen. These humble inventions made the cold months bearable without breaking their vows of austerity. The faint smell of baked bread and tallow drifts from the refectory, a reminder that faith and practicality often walk hand in hand. You follow the cloisters-covered walk, where snowlight filters through open arches. The courtyard beyond is blanketed in white, with only a few bird tracks marking its surface. The air is filled with quiet sounds. A cough, a turning page, the rustle of robes. The peace here feels alive, as though it breathes. A senior monk passes, his face lined and serene. He greets you with a small bow before disappearing into the chapel. You pause to listen. Inside, voices rise in unison, chanting in Latin. The melody moves slowly, floating upward and lingering in the rafters. It is a sound both human and otherworldly, as if born from the very walls. You step closer, drawn by it, and realize how the chant replaces warmth. The music fills what the fire cannot reach. A curious entry from a 14th century chronicle mentions that monks believed singing kept the soul warm, even when the body froze. The rhythm of the psalms, steady and precise, mirrored the beating of the heart. You feel that truth now as you stand in the doorway, the chant washing over you. It is simple, repetitive, and deeply calming. After the service, the monks disperse silently. Some head toward the kitchen, others to the scriptorium where books are copied by hand. You follow the faint scent of ink and parchment to a small chamber lit by narrow windows. Inside, a few figures sit at wooden desks, their heads bent in concentration. Quills scratch softly against parchment, the sound crisp in the cold air. It is generally accepted among historians that winter was the most productive season for monastic scribes. With fields frozen and travel limited, monks devoted themselves to preserving texts, scripture, medicine, philosophy, even poetry. The careful labor of their hands kept knowledge alive through centuries of darkness. You watch as one monk pauses, flexes his fingers, and warms them briefly over a candle before continuing his work. Every word he copies is a bridge to the future. You walk onward to the refectory, where a few monks eat their midday meal in silence. The fare is plain: broth, bread, and perhaps a slice of cheese. Steam curls gently from the bowls, and the smell of herbs fills the air. You sit quietly, tasting the broth. It is thin but comforting, the kind of food that warms the stomach more than the tongue. No one speaks. The only sound is the soft scrape of wooden spoons. Modern researchers often describe monasteries as islands of calm amid the storms of medieval life. Within their walls, routine replaced chaos, order overcame fear. Yet even here, the cold had its power. Some chronicles mention monks freezing in their sleep or falling ill from damp chambers. Still, faith carried them forward. The endurance they practiced was not only spiritual, it was physical, an act of survival disguised as devotion. You leave the refectory and step outside again. The snow has begun to fall, thick and slow, each flake large enough to see its shape. The sound of the bell rings once more, deep and steady. The monks file back into the chapel, their robes brushing softly against the stone. You watch them go, a dark line moving through the white, and feel something close to peace. As you walk away from the monastery, the valley opens before you again. The snow glitters faintly, and the wind carries the distant echo of the chant. It follows you for a long time, a reminder that faith is not only a matter of words or ritual, it is the quiet strength to rise before dawn, to face the cold with calm hands and steady heart. By the time you return to the village, twilight has settled. The chimneys send up their slow grey breath, and the smell of cooking drifts through the air. You glance back once more toward the ridge, where the monastery's bell tower stands outlined against the sky. It looks still, timeless, like a prayer carved into the horizon. You pull your cloak tighter and whisper a small thanks not to heaven, but to the steady endurance of human hope. The wind picks up again that evening, curling around the roofs and through the cracks in the shutters. You sit close to the fire, the room dim except for the golden circle of light that trembles across the walls. Outside, the snow falls in thick, slow flakes, the kind that hush the world into stillness. Inside, warmth hums softly through the air, and people gather. The night is made for stories. You can feel it in the way everyone leans a little closer to the fire, their faces flickering with the light. Someone pours a ladle of ale into wooden cups, the scent of malt and spice drifting through the room. A few children sit cross-legged on the floor, their eyes wide. An old man clears his throat. The chatter fades, replaced by that shared, expectant silence that always comes before a tale. Written collections from the later Middle Ages describe how storytelling thrived in winter. When fields slept and nights stretched long, words became as precious as food. Every story was a spark against the dark. Some told of saints and miracles, others of ghosts and tricksters, and a few were so strange that even the tellers claimed to have heard them from a cousin's cousin's cousin. You can almost feel that same rhythm now as the old man begins to speak. His voice is deep and steady, carrying the weight of age and memory. He tells of a knight who wandered too far into the forest one winter and met a woman carved from ice, beautiful and deadly. Her eyes, he says, shone like the moon, and her breath froze the air itself. The children shiver, pressing closer to their parents. The fire cracks, as if punctuating his words. Curiously, across Europe, such tales of winter spirits and frozen maidens appear again and again. Some were warnings against straying too far from home, others reflections of the cold's indifferent beauty. In northern villages, people told of the snow mother who walked the hills with a basket of frost, covering the world in white each year before retreating to sleep beneath the mountains. These stories were both explanations and comforts. They gave the season a face, something to imagine when the nights grew too long. You sip your ale and listen. The next storyteller, a woman with a voice like creaking wood, speaks of Saint Dunstan, who trapped the devil by his nose with a pair of tongs and made him promise never to tempt blacksmiths again. Laughter ripples through the room. Someone adds that the saint's tongs still hang above the forge just in case. Faith and humour sit side by side in these tales, blending as easily as smoke with air. A record from a 13th century friar's notebook mentions that many villages kept certain nights each month for fire talk, These gatherings built more than entertainment, they bound the community. Everyone, young and old, rich and poor, shared the same space, the same flame. You can see that truth here. The Lord's messenger sitting beside a weaver, the healer beside a shepherd. The glow of the fire erases the lines between them. The woman finishes her tale, and another begins, this time softer, slower. It is about a ghost that returns to warm itself at the hearth of its old home. The children inch closer to the flames, glancing at the dark corners of the room. You can feel the tension rise, delicious and uneasy. Outside, the wind moans faintly, as if joining the story itself. An odd detail found in parish writings suggests that such tales served a moral purpose. They warned against greed, pride, and the breaking of promises. Yet they also carried traces of older, pre-Christian beliefs. Spirits of the dead, forest guardians, talking animals. These figures lingered like forgotten gods, disguised in new clothes. The church frowned upon them, but even priests told ghost stories when the nights grew cold enough. The old man speaks again, his voice low now, almost a whisper. He tells of a candle that burns blue when spirits draw near, and every face in the room turns toward the fire. For a moment, the flame does flicker, oddly, a thin thread of blue winding through the orange. Someone laughs nervously, and the tension breaks. Laughter replaces fear once more. You lean back, the warmth soaking into your bones. Around you faces glow with contentment. The room smells of wood smoke, ale, and wool. Each story adds another layer of warmth, a reminder that imagination can heat the spirit when fire alone is not enough. Modern researchers often note how oral tradition preserved history in villages where few could read. Through stories, people remembered famines, wars, and blessings. The past lived not in books but in voices. Every tale, however fanciful, carried a grain of truth, an echo of something real that time refused to erase. A child falls asleep beside the hearth, head resting on folded arms. Someone throws another log onto the fire, and sparks rise, brief and bright, before vanishing into the smoke. The storytellers grow quieter, voices blending with the crackle of burning wood. Outside, the wind softens, and the snow continues to fall. You look around the room one last time. The faces illuminated by the flames look peaceful, almost holy. It is not the kind of holiness that belongs to churches or prayers, but the quiet sacredness of people gathered against the dark, their breath and laughter keeping one another alive. When the final story fades, silence settles again. Someone yawns, another stretches. The fire burns lower, its light dim but steady. You close your eyes, hearing the whisper of logs shifting, and imagine the echoes of every story told here across centuries. They rise like smoke, drifting toward the rafters, where they linger long after the words are gone. The frost glitters brighter today, catching the first hints of sun that break through the heavy sky. You wake to a stillness that feels different, softer somehow. The air is sharp, yet carries a hum of movement, as if the world is preparing to stir again. The snow crunches under your boots when you step outside, and far across the fields you see a thin line of people moving along the river. Something new is happening. You follow the path toward the riverbank, where the surface gleams like glass. The villagers are gathered there, talking and laughing in low voices. The river has frozen solid, smooth and wide, and for the first time this season, it is not an obstacle, but a road. Wooden stalls rise along the banks, their roofs made of cloth and straw, fluttering lightly in the cold wind. It is a market, but one unlike any other you have seen the ice fair. Chroniclers from the 17th century later wrote about great frost fairs in London and the Baltic ports, but smaller versions existed long before. When rivers froze deep enough, they became meeting places. Traders and travellers could move freely again, crossing from village to village. The still, white surface turned into a highway of hope. You walk slowly onto the ice. The surface creaks faintly beneath your feet but holds firm. People have scattered rushes and straw to keep it from growing too slippery. The sound of voices fills the air, bartering, greeting, laughing. There are stalls of woolen mittens, clay pots, smoked fish, honey and candles. The smell of roasted chestnuts and ale drifts across the frozen air. You feel warmth return to your fingers despite the chill. Curiously, some records mention that even priests and monks joined these gatherings, blessing the ice to prevent accidents and offering small relics for good luck. The fairs were both commerce and celebration, a moment when fear gave way to fellowship. Children chased one another across the smooth surface, sliding until their laughter echoed over the valley. You stop at a stall selling ribbons dyed in faded colors. The woman behind it smiles, her breath clouding the air. You ask where she found such bright dye in winter, and she tells you of traders from the south who pass through once each season, bringing color to the white world. You buy a length of blue cloth, wrapping it around your wrist, a small rebellion against the monotony of frost. In the center of the frozen fair, a group of musicians plays pipes and drums. Their rhythm carries far across the ice, a bright sound against the endless grey sky. Couples dance carefully, boots sliding, hands clasped. Even those who do not dance sway with the melody, nodding in time. The music feels ancient, a heartbeat pulsing through the season. Evidence from town records shows that frozen trade routes linked not only villages but whole regions. Sledges carried salt and wool across rivers that were impassable in summer. For a few weeks each year, isolation broke apart. People exchanged goods, gossip, and promises before the thaw returned and cut them off once more. You realize now how precious this brief connection must have felt, as fleeting as it was beautiful. You stand near a stall where a merchant sells carved wooden charms, small animals, hearts, and crosses. He tells you they bring luck in travel or protect against frostbite. You choose one, shaped like a tiny bird, its wings outstretched, and slip it into your pocket. The merchant smiles and says, "For warmth in the wind." His accent marks him as a traveler from far away, perhaps the north coast or beyond. Modern scholars often describe these ice fairs as symbols of resilience. Nature might freeze the rivers, but humans turned them into roads and marketplaces. The very thing that once isolated them became their meeting ground. You can see that spirit in every face here, people who refuse to let the season silence them. As afternoon fades, the light softens into gold, the stalls begin to close, and the crowd drifts back toward the village. The musicians pack their instruments, their laughter rising through the cold. The river returns to silence, though faint footprints and straw trails mark where life pulsed only moments before. You linger for a while, looking across the frozen expanse, now glowing faintly in the setting sunday. A curious entry in a merchant's diary tells of a fair where lovers met on the ice and exchanged vows before the spring thaw. He wrote that when the river melted, it carried their wishes downstream to the sea. You smile at the image, imagining promises floating beneath the ice, carried by unseen current. The first stars appear as you make your way home. The cold deepens, but your heart feels lighter. You think of the merchants who will travel through the night, of the laughter still echoing faintly from the fair, and of the frozen river glowing beneath the moonlight like a silver road. When you reach your cottage, the fire welcomes you with a soft crackle. You set the ribbon and charm on the table, tokens of the day. The room smells of smoke and wool, familiar and safe. As you sit down, you realize that even in the harshest winter, people have always found ways to connect, to trade, to sing, to share warmth and stories across the ice. Outside, the river lies still, frozen but alive beneath the surface. You close your eyes and can almost hear the faint echo of drums, the laughter of strangers, and the whisper of hope gliding quietly across the frozen world. The wind is quieter tonight, yet the cold cuts deeper. You sit by the fire, your back pressed to the wall, your breath misting in front of you. The flames waver low, thin and uncertain. Around you, the cottage is still. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once, then nothing. Winter has turned harsher now, and the silence feels heavy, like a weight pressing down on every heart in the village. You wake in the morning to the sound of church bells. They toll slowly, each note carrying through the frost-laden air. The rhythm is unmistakable. Someone has died. You pull on your cloak, stepping into the cold. The snow crunches beneath your boots, and the breath of the living rises to meet the grey sky. Parish records show that the cold months were the hardest for survival. Hunger weakened the body, smoke filled the lungs, and frostbite claimed fingers and toes before spring could return. Infants, the elderly, and the poor suffered the most. The toll of winter was quiet but constant, its cruelty veiled in beauty. You walk toward the small churchyard, where villagers have already gathered. The air smells of tallow candles and damp wool. The priest stands near a wooden coffin, his hands clasped tight, his voice hoarse as he recites the familiar prayer. The ground is too hard to dig, so the grave must wait until thaw. For now, the coffin will rest in a small outbuilding beside the church, a silent guest until spring. Curiously, some chronicles note that communities built dead houses in winter simple sheds where coffins were kept safe from scavengers and frost. It sounds grim, but it was an act of care, a promise that those lost would be laid properly to rest when the earth softened again. Even in death, patience was demanded by the season. You stand beside the mourners, their faces lined with exhaustion. The wind moves through their hair like cold fingers. No one weeps loudly. Grief here is quiet, restrained. Life leaves little room for long sorrow. The living must return to their chores, must feed the animals, must keep the fires burning. Grief is folded neatly beside the day's labor. After the prayer, people exchange brief words of comfort. Someone presses a small loaf of bread into the widow's hands. Another promises to check her roof before the next storm. It is kindness without ceremony, the kind that has kept the village alive for generations. You help carry the coffin to the storage house. Inside, the air smells faintly of wax and pine. The walls are lined with straw to keep away dampness. You place the coffin gently on the floor and bow your head. There is a stillness in this place that feels almost sacred. The dead, waiting quietly for spring, seem part of the landscape itself. In a strange way, their rest feels peaceful, as though the season holds them in a frozen embrace. A curious note from a monastic text describes how some believed winter deaths were merciful, as the soul passed through the whiteness straight to heaven. Others thought dying in frost meant the spirit wandered until thaw. Both ideas reveal the same truth. No one wanted to think that the cold could have the final say. You return home through the quiet village. Smoke rises thinly from chimneys. The snow underfoot has turned to a mixture of ice and slush, crunching and sighing beneath your steps. You see a child pulling a sled, a man splitting wood, a woman shaking a rug in the doorway. Life, fragile but relentless, continues its rhythm. Inside your cottage, the fire has nearly gone out. You kneel and feed it small twigs until the flame catches again. The warmth climbs slowly, filling the air with the scent of smoke and ash. You sit there for a long while, staring into the glow. The fire's pulse feels like your own. Modern scholars often reflect on how medieval people faced death with remarkable familiarity. To them, it was not a distant fear but a companion that walked beside them through the snow. Survival taught acceptance. They mourned, prayed, and moved on because they had to. The rhythm of life demanded it, just as the earth demanded rest before rebirth. As the afternoon fades, a thin fog drifts through the village. You hear footsteps outside, then a knock. It is your neighbor, carrying a pot of broth. He sets it by the fire, mutters a quiet blessing, and leaves. You lift the lid, and the smell of onions and herbs fills the room. The simple gesture touches something deep inside you. In times of loss, nourishment is its own kind of prayer. You eat slowly, watching the snow fall outside. The flakes move gently, almost tenderly, as if trying to cover the sorrow of the day. The world looks untouched, but beneath the surface, Grief and endurance share the same space. Later that night, the wind rises again, rattling the shutters. You lie awake on your straw bed, listening to the fire crackle. The sound of the bell still echoes faintly in your mind, each toll a reminder that life in this season is as delicate as frost. You pull the blanket closer and whisper a small prayer not for yourself, but for the ones waiting beneath the snow. When sleep finally comes, it feels light, almost fragile. The wind outside softens, and the fire burns low but steady. You dream of thawing fields, of green shoots breaking through the white. The dream feels so real that when you wake, your heart aches with hope. For every death, spring still waits, patient and sure. The wind has softened, and for the first time in months you hear water moving. It is faint, like a whisper beneath the earth, but it is there. You step outside and feel the air shift against your face. The snow no longer sparkles. It has begun to sag, melting into dark, wet patches of soil. A single drop falls from the eaves of your roof and lands on your hand. It is warm enough to melt. The thaw has begun. You walk toward the edge of the village, where the river lies under its thinning skin of ice. The sound of trickling water grows louder with every step. When you reach the bank, you see it at last, a thin crack running through the frozen surface, black water glimmering below. It feels like the world taking its first breath after a long sleep. Chronicles from the late Middle Ages described this time of year with reverence. People saw the thaw as both miracle and warning. The sudden rush of melting snow could flood fields and wash away bridges, yet it also promised life. The first days of mud were celebrated, even when they made travel miserable. To see brown earth again, after months of white, was to glimpse salvation. You kneel and touch the edge of the riverbank. The soil is soft, smelling faintly of rot and sweetness. Beneath the surface lies the future harvest, still sleeping. You imagine the roots stretching, sensing warmth. A few green shoots poke through near the fence line, early weeds, reckless but brave. The sight makes you smile. Curiously, many villages mark the first thaw with quiet rituals. In England and France, people lit small fires at the crossroads to wake the soil. In parts of Eastern Europe, they carried wooden effigies of winter to the nearest stream and cast them into the water, cheering as the current carried them away. Whether pagan or Christian in origin, the message was the same. Winter had been endured, and the world would live again. You pass the fields that once lay frozen and white. Now they glisten with meltwater, puddles reflecting the grey sky. A man stands ankle deep in mud, testing the ground with a stick. His grin tells you what he feels beneath his boots. The land is loosening. The time for mending ploughs and sharpening blades is ending. Soon, the rhythm of sowing will begin again. A record from a Yorkshire manor lists the day of plough blessing, celebrated as soon as the frost left the ground. The villagers carried the plough decorated with ribbons and greenery through the streets, singing hymns and pouring ale into the furrows. You can almost hear their voices now, rough but joyful, echoing across the wet fields. You return to your cottage, where the roof drips steadily into a wooden bucket. The sound is irregular, musical, like distant harp strings. The air inside feels different too, less heavy, as though the walls themselves are breathing again. You open the door wider, letting the faint scent of wet earth and pine drift in. Modern historians often write that the medieval year truly began not in January but at the thaw. Everything depended on it. The planting, the trade routes, the rebuilding of homes. The thaw was more than weather. It was rebirth. You understand that now, watching the droplets trace silver lines down the window. In the afternoon, the church bell rings again, this time not for mourning but for thanksgiving. The villagers gather outside, faces turned upward toward the softening sky. The priest speaks briefly, thanking God for the return of warmth. Around you, people murmur small prayers of their own, words of gratitude that sound more like sighs. A child laughs and points upward. You follow her gaze and see a flock of birds wheeling across the horizon, dark specks against the brightening clouds. Their cries cut through the air, wild and alive. Everyone stops to watch them, For months, the sky had been silent. Now it sings again. As evening comes, you sit by the hearth and notice the change in the light. It lasts longer now, reaching deeper into the room. The shadows stretch slowly instead of arriving all at once. The fire crackles lower than usual, and for the first time you do not feel afraid to let it die down. The air is still cold, but not cruel. You can smell the earth again, rich and damp, a promise of green things to come. An old saying written in a 15th century farming manual comes to mind. He who endures the frost shall dine with spring. You whisper it quietly, almost as a prayer. The words feel true. The hardest days are behind you. Soon there will be work again. Long days in the field, the ache of muscles and the hum of insects. You find yourself longing for it. You look out through the small window one last time. The snow is melting faster now, trickling down the paths like threads of silver. In the distance, you can still see patches of white clinging to the hills, but they seem to fade even as you watch. The world is returning, slow and steady, just as it always has. You close your eyes, listening to the rhythm of dripping water. Each drop feels like a heartbeat, patient and sure. After the silence of so many frozen nights, the sound is almost music. You breathe deeply, filling your lungs with the scent of thawing earth, and let yourself believe that the season of survival has finally begun to give way to the season of living. The thaw has loosened the grip of winter, but the nights are still long enough for stories. The villagers sit by their fires again, trading not just news but old legends that have returned with the melting snow. You join them one evening, drawn by the glow of a neighbour's hearth. The room smells of damp wool and wood smoke, and the air hums with quiet expectation. Someone has begun to speak about the spirits that walk when winter dies. You settle on a stool near the door, listening. The man telling the tale is grey-bearded and slow-spoken, his eyes glinting in the firelight. He begins softly, as though the words themselves might wake something sleeping in the walls. When the frost breaks, he says, the old spirits stir beneath the ground. Some are kind, some are not. The children lean closer, their eyes wide. Chroniclers of the Middle Ages often noted how the turning of the seasons was filled with superstition. The people believed that winter's end was a dangerous time, when the barrier between worlds grew thin. Cold spirits, long buried in snow, might slip free before being chased away by the Sunday. The stories were cautionary but also strangely comforting. If the world could hold spirits, it meant the world was still alive. The storyteller continues. He speaks of the Frost Mother, a tall figure wrapped in white who visits the fields at night to count the seeds sleeping beneath the soil. If a farmer greets her politely, she leaves the crops in peace. If he mocks her or leaves his hearth untended, she breathes upon his door and freezes his bread solid by morning. The villagers laugh nervously, but some make the sign of the cross all the same. A woman by the window adds her own story, her voice soft but steady. She tells of the hearth warden, a tiny soot-covered spirit who lives inside the chimney and guards the fire from going out. He hates quarrels and rewards peaceful homes with glowing embers that last till dawn. She smiles as she speaks, and you notice that several people glance toward their hearths, as though wondering if he listens even now. In parts of Eastern Europe, similar tales spoke of the frost fiend, a blue-skinned wanderer who stole warmth from those who wasted wood. In Scandinavia, children were told to leave a bowl of milk outside for the snowkin, invisible beings who protected travelers caught in storms. Such beliefs varied from village to village, yet they all shared the same heart, respect for nature and humility before the cold. Curiously, a collection of medieval sermons once warned against these stories, calling them old lies of the pagan mind. Still, even priests could not fully silence them. They had become part of the rhythm of winter, woven into the fabric of survival. Fear turned into folklore, and folklore into comfort. When the nights stretched endlessly, it was easier to believe that the frost had a face and the fire had ears. The man at the hearth tells another story now, one that everyone seems to know. It is about a traveler who ignored the warnings and crossed the woods after dusk. He found himself followed by a woman whose footprints left no mark in the snow. She whispered promises of warmth and shelter, and though his heart raced, he followed her deeper into the forest. In the morning, the villagers found him asleep beneath an ice-crusted tree, unharmed but with his hair turned white. He met Winter herself, the old man says, his eyes fixed on the flames, and she let him live because he listened. A hush falls over the room. The only sound is the fire's soft crackle and the sigh of the wind against the shutters. For a moment, it feels as if the very air is holding its breath. Then someone coughs, a log shifts, and laughter breaks the spell. The tension melts into warmth again like snow under sunlight. Historians today often point out how such stories helped people make sense of the unpredictable. Without scientific understanding of weather, disease, or famine, tales of spirits gave shape to uncertainty. They offered both explanation and control. If you honored the Frost Mother, or left milk for the Snowkin, perhaps the next storm would pass you by. You glance toward the fire and imagine the flicker of shapes within it, the silhouettes of all those unseen guardians the stories describe. Maybe they are real in their own way. After all, belief itself can be a kind of warmth, passed down like an ember from one generation to the next. Outside, the wind has quieted, and the snow glows faintly under the moon. The storyteller's voice fades, and people begin to rise, murmuring good nights. You step out into the cool air, the stars bright above you. The fields shimmer with frost, but the chill no longer feels hostile. Somewhere in the distance, you think you hear laughter carried on the wind, or perhaps it is only the creak of the trees. Modern scholars might call it imagination, yet as you walk home through the glittering quiet, it feels like something more, a reminder that every season holds its own kind of mystery. The cold may retreat, but the stories remain, keeping company with those who still listen to the language of snow and fire. When you reach your cottage, you pause at the door and glance back once more. The village glows with tiny lights, each one a fire still burning. You whisper a simple good night to whatever spirits may wander and step inside. The hearth waits, warm and alive, and for a moment you think you hear the faintest sigh of approval from the chimney itself. The morning light creeps slowly through the clouds, pale and forgiving. You wake to the smell of wood smoke and the faint hum of distant bells. The snow has thinned into slush, and the ground beneath it is dark and soft. Winter is loosening its grip, yet its shadow still lingers. The villagers are gathering near the church again, this time not for mourning or fasting, but for something brighter, a celebration of survival. You step outside, pulling your cloak tight. The air is sharp, but no longer cruel. Along the path, people carry small bundles of greenery, holly and ivy, kept fresh from the deep freeze in root cellars. A few hold candles wrapped in cloth to keep the wind from snuffing them out. The smell of pine and wax mingles with the faint scent of thawing earth. Records from parish calendars show that this season was filled with overlapping traditions. Ancient midwinter rituals had once honored the returning sun with feasts and fire. Christianity reshaped them into holy days, blending the old with the new. The villagers might not know the theology behind each prayer, but they know the rhythm. Light must follow darkness, always. The priest stands near the church door, blessing the candles as people kneel before him. To bring light into every home, he says, dipping his hand in holy water. The droplets freeze almost as they fall, but no one seems to mind. You accept your candle, feeling its smooth surface, and tuck it inside your cloak. Its glow will join the others tonight when every hearth is rekindled in honor of renewal. Curiously, some old chronicles describe this practice as a merging of faiths. The Romans once burned torches to mark the return of warmth. Pagan Britons lit fires on hills to summon the sun back from its long sleep. Now, the same flames are offered to saints instead. Belief changes names, but its shape remains the same. A circle of fire in a world of cold. You walk with the procession as it moves through the village. Bells ring softly, and voices rise in a low, steady hymn. The sound is haunting, beautiful, carrying over the wet fields and frozen roofs. The villagers stop at every house, lighting a candle in each window to chase away the last of the dark. Small flames shimmer through the mist like stars scattered upon the earth. An elderly woman beside you murmurs that this was once the time when winter spirits flee. You smile but say nothing. Whether it is faith or folklore, the act itself feels powerful. The night has ruled long enough, and now the people are taking it back with simple light. Inside your home, the air is cool and still. You set your blessed candle beside the hearth and touch it with a burning twig. The wick catches slowly, the flame thin and golden. Its glow fills the corners of the room, touching the walls as if waking them. For a moment, you feel something shift, not in the air, but inside yourself. A quiet peace, fragile but real. A fragment from a medieval poem drifts into your memory. The dark shall bow, and light shall bloom. Those words could have been written by anyone, at any time, yet they fit perfectly here. You imagine generations before you performing the same ritual, whispering the same prayers, their faces lit by the same trembling glow. Later in the evening, the villagers gather again in the square. The candles in the windows flicker, reflecting off puddles of melting snow. A small bonfire crackles at the center, built from old beams and dried straw saved through the season. Sparks rise like tiny suns into the night. Children dance around the fire while the adults sing softly, their voices weaving together like threads of warmth. Modern scholars say that these early spring festivals were more than religion. They were acts of renewal for the mind and spirit. After months of darkness and confinement, people needed proof that life continued. Lighting candles, sharing food, and singing in the open air turned hope into something tangible. You stand at the edge of the firelight, watching the faces glow in its warmth. For the first time in months, laughter comes easily. Someone passes a cup of ale into your hands, and you raise it with a nod. The drink is strong, tasting of honey and spice. You sip slowly, letting it spread through you like sunlight. An old man begins to tell a familiar story, one of the Frost Mother's defeat by the fire saint who brings spring each year. The crowd joins in, finishing the lines by heart. You notice how the story feels lighter now, more playful than fearful. The frost may return next year, but tonight it is gone, and the fire has claimed victory. You look up at the sky, where a few stars blink between the clouds. Their light seems closer now, no longer distant. Around you the flames dance, the air hums with music, and the cold retreats inch by inch. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the soft chorus of voices and feeling the warmth against your skin. When you finally return home, your candle still burns in the window. Its reflection shivers gently on the glass, a small beacon against the lingering dark. You sit beside it, watching the wax pool slowly, and feel something inside you settle. The long winter is ending. The cycle continues, just as it always has. You whisper a quiet blessing not to any saint or spirit, but to the simple, stubborn light that has carried you this far. Then you close your eyes, letting the faint scent of smoke and pine lull you toward rest, while the candle burns steadily beside you, holding the promise of spring. The morning sky opens wide and silver, stretched thin with streaks of cloud. You wake to the smell of wet soil and wood smoke, a scent that feels like a memory returning. The snow has retreated to the edges of the fields, clinging to shadows and fence posts. The earth, newly exposed, glistens dark and soft under your boots. The air hums faintly with the sound of dripping water, as if the world itself is exhaling. You step outside and see the first true color of the year. A line of green shoots pushes bravely through the thawed soil beside the barn. They are small, almost invisible at first, yet they draw your eyes instantly. The sight makes you pause. After so many months of grey and white, this sudden flicker of life feels unreal. You kneel down, touch the fragile blades, and feel warmth rising from the ground. The rhythm of the village has changed. The stillness of winter is giving way to motion. People are already in the fields, repairing fences, clearing ditches, testing the ploughs. The sound of hammers and voices fills the air, bright and quick. You hear laughter again, mingling with the rhythmic creak of wooden wheels. The frost has loosened not only the soil, but the spirit of the people. Records from medieval farming accounts describe this period as one of joyful labour. Though hunger might still linger, the return of work was cause for celebration. Fields could be planted, animals led to pasture, and debts paid in effort rather than coin. Spring was a promise that everyone kept with their hands. You join the others, walking into the field where the last patches of snow still cling to the furrows. The soil beneath is dark, cold, and heavy. When you press your boot into it, the mud squelches, rich and fertile. You lift a wooden rake and begin to clear debris left by the storm. Around you, the air buzzes with movement, people calling instructions, oxen snorting as they pull the first plough, the rhythmic sound of metal striking stone. Curiously, in many parts of Europe, farmers began each spring season with a blessing. They marked the first furrow with holy water or scattered salt to purify the ground. Others laid a loaf of bread in the soil to feed the earth before taking anything from it. You see an old woman here doing something similar. She sprinkles a handful of grain across the field, murmuring words that sound more like song than prayer. By midday, the sun has grown stronger. You can feel it on your neck, unfamiliar but welcome. The snow that remains begins to melt faster, turning the air damp and sweet. The village smells alive again. Smoke, soil, sweat, and distant hints of grass. You stop for a moment, resting your hands on the rake, and take it all in. The world feels wider. In one of the chronicles written by a travelling monk, there is mention of the breathing earth. He describes how the ground seems to sigh when the frost breaks, as if awakening from sleep. You hear that same sound now, the slow release of ice from beneath your boots, the trickle of hidden streams finding their way back to life. Modern historians often note that medieval people measured time not by clocks, but by sensation. The scent of damp earth, the sound of birds returning, the colour of light on the horizon, these were the markers of their calendar. You find yourself living that rhythm easily, without effort. It feels natural to listen to the soil instead of the sky. Later in the afternoon, a flock of birds sweeps over the field. Their wings flash silver in the sunlight, and their cries ripple through the air. Everyone stops to watch. The sight draws quiet smiles from faces still marked by the wear of winter. For a moment, there is no sound but the rush of wings and the creak of thawing branches. You think of other lands far to the north and east, where people are also emerging from the cold. In Norway, families break the ice in their wells with laughter and song. In the Alps, shepherds ring bells for luck before driving their flocks upward. In Rus, villagers paint red on their doors to invite warmth into their homes. Across continents, the same story unfolds. Life returns, cautious but steady. You remember the monastery's chant, the old man's stories, the healer's herbs, the children's laughter in the snow. All of it feels like a single thread now, weaving through every season. The same endurance that carried people through frost carries them now into the Sunday. You smile as you work, the mud clinging to your boots but no longer feeling like burden. It feels like home. As evening falls, the light turns golden, soft and forgiving. You lean against your spade, looking across the fields. The air is still cold enough to bite, but it no longer feels hostile. The village roofs smoke gently in the distance, and the first frogs begin to croak near the riverbank. You feel something loosen inside you, something that had been clenched since the first frost. A line from an old hymn drifts through your memory. In cold we prayed, in warmth we rise. It fits perfectly. You walk back toward your cottage, the mud heavy on your boots, but your steps light. The sun sinks low, casting a faint blush across the melting snow. The year is new again, and so are you. Inside, the fire burns smaller now, not out of desperation but out of choice. You sit near it, Stretch your hands toward the warmth and listen to the faint dripping outside. Each drop of water feels like a heartbeat, steady and alive. You breathe deeply, the air rich with the scent of change. Tomorrow will bring more work, more thaw, more Sunday. But tonight, you let yourself simply exist in the balance between what was and what will be. The cold has not vanished, but it has lost its power. The earth breathes again, and you breathe with it. The sky at dawn is the color of pewter washed with rose. You wake to birdsong, faint but clear, threading through the air like silk. The sound feels strange after months of silence. You lie still for a moment, listening, and realize how deeply the village has changed. The frost no longer clings to the windows. The smoke from chimneys rises straight and thin, no longer struggling against the wind. Somewhere outside, a dog barks, not out of warning, but play. You sit up and stretch, feeling the ache in your shoulders from the previous day's work. The smell of earth has filled the cottage, seeping in from the doorway where you left your boots. You smile at it. The scent that once meant mud and struggle now smells like renewal. You step outside, pulling your cloak over your shoulders. The air still holds a chill, but it carries warmth too, faint and gentle. The fields glimmer under the morning light, wet with meltwater. You see villagers already working, their figures small against the wide expanse. Voices rise across the open space. Greetings, laughter, the clatter of tools. The rhythm of life has returned. Chroniclers from the late medieval period often described spring as the season of repair. After months of stillness, everything must be mended: the fences, the carts, the faith of the people themselves. You see that truth in every movement around you. The blacksmith's hammer rings steady again, hens scratch in the thawed soil, and smoke curls upward from baking ovens. The village hums like a living thing, slow and content. You walk toward the fields, where the thawed ground squelches underfoot. The soil is rich and dark, already being turned for planting. You join in, hands gripping the wooden handle of a spade, the muscles in your arms stretching with the effort. The air smells of mud and sweat and sunlit hay. You dig until warmth seeps through your chest, until the rhythm feels almost like song. Curiously, some records mention that people used to sing as they worked the first days of spring. The songs were old, older than the churches, older even than the village itself. They carried words of gratitude to the land, thanking it for surviving the cold. The melodies changed from place to place, yet the meaning was always the same: life endures. You hum without realizing it, a low tune that feels familiar though you cannot name it. When the sun climbs higher, you rest your tools and sit by the edge of the field. The river nearby moves freely again, its surface flashing like metal. You watch the current twist around stones, the sound soft and steady. The same river that froze your breath in winter now speaks gently, washing away the last traces of ice. A few children run past, their boots splashing through shallow puddles. One holds a branch with ribbons tied to it, fluttering in the wind. You remember the old woman's words about such ribbons tokens for the wind spirits, offerings for calm weather. Whether superstition or simple joy, it feels right to see color in the air again. A note from an early traveler's journal describes villages in the Alps painting crosses on their doors each spring, marking survival through the winter. Some used red ochre, others soot mixed with oil. It was not only prayer, but proof. We have endured. You look at your own cottage from a distance, small and strong, its roof patched and its chimney steady. It too has survived. As the afternoon deepens, the fields begin to shine with standing water. You work alongside your neighbors until your hands ache and your cloak smells of soil. The sky grows brighter still, streaked with pale blue. Someone calls for ale, and soon the sound of laughter drifts again. Work and joy have become one. Modern scholars like to say that the medieval world was defined by endurance. Yet standing here, you see something else. It was not merely survival, it was the art of turning hardship into rhythm. of finding beauty in the smallest returns, a sprout, a song, a flame that refuses to die. The people did not simply outlast the winter, they carried warmth through it, like a hidden ember waiting to spark again. The sun begins to dip, painting the sky gold. The shadows of the houses stretch long over the fields. You walk home slowly, the air humming with the sound of insects waking in the reeds. Your boots leave dark prints in the mud that glisten as the light fades. At your door you pause, looking back once more at the village. The roofs glow softly in the last of the light, smoke drifting like ribbons into the calm evening sky. Inside, your cottage feels smaller but fuller. The walls, blackened by months of firelight, seem to hold the memory of every word spoken here. You kneel by the hearth and stir the ashes. The coals glow faintly, a reminder of the nights you fought to keep them alive. You add a few sticks, and the fire blooms again, its light steady and kind. For a long moment, you sit in silence, listening to the familiar sound of crackling wood. Outside, the river murmurs, and an owl calls from the trees. You think of the monks chanting, the merchants on the frozen road, the children's laughter in the snow, the wolves beyond the fields, and the hands that built and mended and tended through it all. Every memory glows like a small light in the mind. You realize then that winter was not only about endurance, but about memory, the keeping of small fires inside the soul. The frost tested everything, but it also revealed what truly lasts: the warmth between people, the strength of quiet faith, and the patience of those who wait for light. The fire burns lower. You stretch out on your straw bed, the blanket heavy on your shoulders, and listen to the night settling around you. The last breath of winter sighs against the door, soft and harmless now. The light flickers, painting gold across the rafters. You close your eyes, and the world feels gentle at last. The cold has gone to sleep, and so have you. The fire hums quietly, shrinking to embers. Each breath of air feels slower, calmer, carrying the faint scent of ash and warm wood. Outside, the wind drifts softly through the open fields, brushing over puddles and tender shoots. The stars above shimmer faintly, patient and kind. You let the last thoughts of the long winter fade from your mind. The ache in your hands, the sting of frost, the endless grey, they all soften now, dissolving into the rhythm of your heartbeat. You breathe in deeply. The room feels lighter. The warmth of the fire settles gently into your chest, spreading like calm water. The world outside has found its balance again, and so have you. Everything slows. The dripping from the eaves, the rustle of the thatch, the faint whistle of the wind. You are no longer cold, no longer waiting. The earth sleeps softly beneath you, full of life waiting to bloom. The people you met, the villagers, the monks, the traders linger in your mind like sparks in the dark. Their resilience becomes your own, their peace your rest. You picture the snow melting far away, rivers flowing free, and the fire that never truly went out. Now you can rest. Let the warmth settle into your bones. Let the quiet hum of the world carry you gently away. The long winter is over. The story has ended. And somewhere, just beyond the horizon, spring begins. Sweet dreams.